Chapter 631. As soon as the horse-faced man's voice fell, Li Daocheng's light voice came from behind the villagers. But before the villagers could react, a figure that was not much bigger than a palm flashed by. The girl, who was completely desperate, had been caught by the horse-faced man. The girl was frightened, but she was not frightened that she was going to be eaten, but that a little monkey came across the air and landed on the horse-faced man's long face. In this barren land of death, the horse-faced man was a terrible beast that made all living creatures tremble in fear. However, at this moment, a strange little monkey was lying on the horse-faced man's face, biting off one of the horse-faced man's hideous eyeballs and swallowing them into its stomach. The horse-faced man, who usually felt no pain, screamed in pain for some reason. He let go of the girl and freed his hand to grab the little monkey lying on his face. The girl quickly escaped, but her eyes were stunned as she watched the little monkey jump up and down on the horse-faced man's body. Every time it landed on a place, it would open its mouth and bite off a piece. After a while, the horse-faced man's skin was torn open. The villagers were stunned on the spot, each with a stunned expression on their faces. The tall man guarded the girl who had escaped behind him and also stared blankly at the little monkey who was constantly gnawing on the horse-faced man. The behavior of the little monkey completely subverted the villagers' cognition. How could there be such an incredible creature in this world? The other horse-faced man tried to come up to help, but before it could get close, the little monkey jumped back and used the same trick again. In a short time, the two horse-faced men were bitten by the little monkey and screamed again and again. As the king of the barren land, the horse-faced man was helpless against the little monkey. Underworld beasts were also afraid of the threat of death. The strange little monkey made them feel more and more afraid. Without hesitation, they turned around and wanted to escape. But the horse-faced man had just run 2 steps when the little monkey suddenly made a terrible roar. Its figure quickly grew bigger, and soon it grew to more than 2 meters high. It grabbed a horse-faced man in one hand and bit off the heads of the 2 horse-faced men one by one. The big shabby was not as cute as in its original state. It looked like a fierce ancient ape. The horse-faced man was like a chicken in the hands of the shabby. In a few seconds, only half of his body was left. The villagers watched this shocking scene with their mouths wide open. Their minds went blank. Their worldview had completely collapsed at this moment. Father, that ape is so scary. When a young girl saw the cute little monkey transform into a huge ancient ape, her delicate body trembled. The shabby quickly wiped out the 2 horse-faced men. Not even their bones were left. It licked its lips as if it had not had enough. Suddenly, Shabby turned to look at the villagers. The villagers jumped back in fright, ready to run away at any time. Don't be afraid. It doesn't eat humans. A faint voice sounded from the side. Only then did the villagers discover the existence of Li Daocheng. The tall man turned around and saw the bloody man who was on the verge of death squatting in front of an injured villager to help him heal. The other 2 villagers had already stood up from the ground and seemed to be fine. May I ask which village you are from? The tall man asked tentatively. Li Daocheng did not immediately answer. He handed the villager a pill and then stood up. He looked at the tall man and asked curiously, "Village? What village?" The tall man was stunned. "You don't know about the village? Could it be that you came from outside the wasteland?" Li Daocheng thought for a moment and said, "I guess so. This place is called the wasteland." When the tall man heard Li Daocheng's affirmative answer, his eyes flashed with fear, curiosity, and excitement. The wasteland was vast and boundless, but he had heard from the elders in the village that there was a city in the south of the wasteland, outside the endless mountain range. However, no one had ever heard of anyone being able to walk out of the endless mountain range. For hundreds of years, those who entered the endless mountain range either never returned, or after they were fully equipped, they returned in a sorry state. Moreover, all of them were frightened and would soon die. It was said that in the endless mountain range, there were underworld beasts more terrifying than horse-faced men and minotaurs. There were even ghosts. If this person came from outside the wasteland, he could only have come from the other side of the endless mountain range. No wonder this person was covered in wounds and blood. He must have gone through a lot of hardships before he was lucky enough to pass through the endless mountain range. The tall man did not believe that anyone could pass through the endless mountain range with their own strength. The entire wasteland was unimaginably huge. The furthest place the tall man had been to was a small town 500 kilometers away from the village. That was the most prosperous place in the wasteland. The tall man nodded and introduced, "Yes, this is the wasteland. To be precise, it's the southern wasteland." Li Daochong asked, "Which cultivation planet in the spirit realm is this?" The tall man was stunned. "Spirit realm? Cultivation planet? What's that?" "Huh." Li Daochong suddenly realized that his question was a little abrupt. He did not even know about the spirit realm and the cultivation planet. How primitive were these people? No wonder they did not have any spirit energy in their bodies. They did not even have spirit meridians. It was just that their physiques were a little special, allowing them to be stronger than ordinary people in the spirit realm. However, compared to cultivators who had awakened their spirit meridians after the age of 16, they were far inferior. If it was not the spirit realm, it could only be the Hades. Li Daochong thought to himself. Li Daochong's expression changed slightly. "It's nothing. It's just the name of the place. It's fine if you don't know." "Here, ugh." Li Daochong was halfway through his sentence when his chest suddenly turned upside down. Wah! He spat out a mouthful of blood. For some reason, the poison in his body flared up. Li Daochong almost lost his balance. "Are you okay?" The tall man stepped forward to support Li Daochong, but a big furry hand beat him to it. "Roar!" Shabi saw that Li Daochong's situation was not good and let out an anxious roar. The sound shook the tall man's eardrums, and the girl, standing at the side, sat on the ground. While Shabi supported Li Daochong, he swung his hand, and the tall man was sent flying. Fortunately, Shabi's subconscious action was not very strong. In addition, the tall man consciously stepped back, which removed most of the force. However, the tall man still flew out 5 or 6 meters and fell heavily on ground. Fortunately, his body was strong and did not suffer any serious injuries. Li Daochong felt dizzy and his consciousness became blurry. He forced himself to take a deep breath and not faint. "Village chief, it's getting dark. We can't return to the village in time. What should we do?" A villager said anxiously. The tall man got up from the ground and looked up at the sky, then looked at the load Luo beast corpse. "We can still make it if we don't bring the load Luo beast corpse." The tall man was reluctant to part with it, but there was nothing he could do. If he brought this huge monster with him, his movement speed would be greatly reduced. But if he didn't bring it with him, everyone could travel light. With a distance of more than 10 kilometers, if they ran all the way, they could rush back within 40 minutes. The tall man glanced at Li Daochong and hesitated. "Sir, it's getting late. Once night falls, the entire wasteland will become a paradise for the underworld beasts. Ghost corpses will appear in groups, and corrupt wolves will be everywhere. It's not safe outside. If you want, you can return to the village with us." Li Daochong nodded dizzily. "Thank you." The tall man nodded and glanced at the other villagers. "Let's go back to the village." Li Daochong whispered a few words in Shabi's ear. Shabi's big eyes blinked twice. The tall man was in front, the girl was behind, and the few villagers who were still alive were behind them. The group of 8 people ran towards the northwest. After running for a while, the girl asked curiously, "Father, why didn't that person follow us?" The tall man did not stop running. He turned his head and saw nothing. He only said, "There's no time. If he wants to follow, then let him. If he doesn't want to, then forget it. With that ancient ape, nothing will happen to him." As soon as the tall man finished speaking, there was a heavy sound of footsteps behind him. It was very heavy. At the same time, it was accompanied by the sound of something rubbing against the dry mud. It raised a cloud of dust. When the tall man turned his head again, an ancient ape was carrying a person on its back and dragging the load Luo beast's tail. It was chasing them at high speed. In a short while, it was parallel to the tall man. The load Luo beast, which was the size of a small house, seemed to be weightless in the ancient ape's hands. The villagers ran as they stared at the Shabi, who had a nonchalant look on his face. Mobile phone. Oh, XN 81 Chinese. Chapter 632. The power that Shabi displayed made the villagers' jaws drop in shock. This loaded Luo beast was much larger than its peers. It weighed at least 6 to 7 tons. However, it seemed to be weightless in the hands of this ancient ape, not affecting its running speed at all. Shabi turned a blind eye to the villagers' gazes. If not for the fact that it didn't know the way, it would have reached its destination in a few minutes. After 2 evolutions, Shabi had already reached the Shabi's juvenile stage. Its strength was equivalent to that of a Yuanian cultivator in the middle or late stage. Dark ghosts below the level of Wu Ghost were just a dish in its eyes. The juvenile Shabi was still very small, and it could enter the adolescent stage after another advancement. At this stage, Shabi could transform into a huge ancient ape of 6 or 7 meters and could crack the earth with one punch. In fact, Shabi was very close to this stage. Following Li Daochong, its meals were always maintained at an extremely high-end level. The corpse of the demon general that it had just eaten was a great tonic for Shabi, but because it didn't have a demon core, it wasn't enough for Shabi to advance. After running for a while, Li Daochong felt very bad. The poison was jumping up and down in his body, and he couldn't control it. He had to find a secluded place as soon as possible to regulate his breathing. Lying on Shabi's back, Li Daochong couldn't enter a meditative state at all. Because Shabi had to wait for the villagers, it couldn't run at full speed. Village chief. Everyone exhausted a lot of energy in the battle with the horse-faced man. Now we can't run fast. At this speed, we won't be able to return to the village before dark. A villager said while running with all his strength. The tall man's expression was solemn. He also felt that everyone's running speed was too slow. Just as the tall man was in a dilemma, Li Daochong's voice sounded, "Village chief, let everyone stand on the corpse of the underworld beast. You just need to point out the direction." The tall man was stunned for a moment, then understood Li Daochong's meaning. He waved his hand. "Everyone jump on the load beast's corpse." The villagers' eyes lit up, and they immediately jumped on the load beast's corpse, holding on to all the parts of the load beast that could be held. The tall man also jumped on with the girl, then extended the spear in his hand and pointed forward, all the way forward. Li Daochong weakly patted Shabi's shoulder. "Little thing, full speed ahead." "Roar." Shabi let out a muffled roar. "Everyone sit tight." Li Daochong did not forget to turn around and remind them. The villagers didn't care and felt that he was making a mountain out of molehill. Everyone was grabbing onto the mane of the loaded Luo beast, so why would they be afraid of falling? In the next second, the villagers were thrown off their feet. They rolled around on the corpses of the loaded Luo beasts in a sorry state. Shabi accelerated, far beyond the imagination of this group of simple villagers. They only heard the sound of the wind, and as far as their eyes could see, they quickly moved back. Under the intense jolting, the villagers felt dizzy. Their stomachs churned and they felt like vomiting. Dust filled the air behind the carcass of the loaded Luo beast, as if thousands of soldiers and horses were galloping past. After a short while, a small black dot appeared in front of him. It was rapidly growing larger at a speed visible to the naked eye. A tall city wall made of dead wood quickly became clear. The Shabi gradually slowed down, and just as the tall man was about to send a signal, dozens of arrows shot out from the tall, withered wooden wall. Swish, swish, swish. Be careful. The tall man subconsciously called out. Shabi, however, acted as if it did not hear him. It continued to run forward, completely ignoring the arrows that were flying towards it. Dong, dong, dong. Most of the arrows hit the Shabi's body, but these arrows, made of unknown materials, couldn't even penetrate the Shabi's fur before they were broken. The Shabi's body was like steel and iron, and these arrows were just toys. Don't attack, it's us. The tall man roared. Swish, swish, swish. There was no response. What greeted him was a hail of arrows, sharper than the first wave, with metal thorns hanging from the arrows. Unfortunately, to the Shabi, these toys were useless no matter how they were armed. Under the Shabi's protection, the arrows did not pose much of a threat to the villagers behind it. Only the edges of the loaded luo beast carcass were full of arrows. The tall man took out a wooden stick from the bag hanging at his waist. He shook it, and it immediately burned. He threw it into the air with force. This was the village's identification signal, indicating that they were on the same side. However, it would have been better if he didn't throw the stick. With this throw, more than 10 fireballs rose from behind the withered wooden wall. These fireballs were weapons of mass destruction used by the village to deal with ghost corpses. The fireballs were actually a special type of flint buried under the wasteland. After digging it out and processing it simply, it would explode upon impact. Its power was comparable to a cannonball. The larger the size, the greater the power. Not good, it's explosive rocks. Dodge! The tall man shouted in horror. Father, what's going on in the village? The young girl could not believe that her own people wanted to kill her. The villagers lying on the loaded luo beast carcass were dumbfounded. They thought that they would be safe once they returned home, but what greeted them was a rain of arrows and explosive rocks. Seeing the explosive rocks whizzing towards them, the villagers were so scared that their faces turned pale. They thought that they would definitely die. Everyone run. A villager shouted in panic. He was the first to jump off the loaded luo beast carcass and fled. The other villagers were already scared to death. When they saw someone jump off the car, they also jumped off. Only the tall man and the young girl were left on the loaded luo beast carcass. The village chief was not scared, but for some reason, his intuition told him that it was safer to hide behind the ancient ape. Li Daochong, who was lying on the ancient ape's back, looked up slightly. He looked at the flaming rocks that came like a meteor shower, but he did not feel anything. Instead, he yawned out of boredom. Not only did Shabi not dodge, but it also leaped up to meet the flying, exploding stones. This leap was more than 10 meters high. Its hand was still holding onto the loaded luo beast's tail. The father and daughter suddenly regretted it. It was too late to jump away. They could only hold on to the loaded luo beast's mane tightly. Boom! It was a loud sound. The 3 exploding stones collided with the Shabi that had leaped high into the air and exploded. A ball of flames engulfed Shabi. On the withered wooden wall of the village, Fu Tong looked at the ancient ape that was engulfed in flames with a sinister smile. However, in just a second, the sinister smile on Fu Tong's face froze. He saw the ancient ape pass through the billowing flames. It was unscathed and jumped down like a divine soldier from the heavens. Thump! Shabi landed on the withered wooden wall of the village. The loaded luo beast's corpse also smashed heavily into the wall. The thick wooden floor cracked. At this time, dozens of village warriors stood on the wall of the village. They all looked at the Shabi that fell from the sky in shock. What the hell was this? A big question mark appeared in every village warrior's mind. They had grown up in this desolate land of death. They had seen many nether beasts and ghosts, but they had never seen a nether beast that looked like an ape. The explosive rocks were very powerful. Just one was enough to turn a group of ghost corpses into ashes. Even a horse-faced man did not dare to take a direct hit from an explosive rock. However, it was useless against this ape. Could it be a terrifying nether beast that had escaped from the endless mountains? Kill. Don't let this beast enter the village. Otherwise, it'll be over. Fu Tong shouted in shock. Some of the village warriors who had been in a daze suddenly came back to their senses. They immediately raised the weapons in their hands and rushed forward. More than 10 spears stabbed towards Shabi's chest at the same time. After Shabi landed, it did not attack. It just looked at the villagers suspiciously. Without Li Daochong's order, Shabi would not attack anyone. Ka ka ka. The spears stabbed into Shabi's body. It was no different from stabbing into an iron wall. They broke instantly. Stop! Almost at the same time, a shout was heard. A tall man walked out from behind Shabi. Village chief? Someone looked at the tall man in surprise and stuttered. What's wrong with you? Didn't I send a signal? Why are you attacking? The tall man questioned. Village chief, Fu Tong said that you are already dead. He also said that there will be a powerful ghost beast attacking and told us to defend. It was Fu Tong who told us to attack. A young man who only had a black bee skin skirt around his waist said. The tall man's expression changed. He immediately looked around, but did not find Fu Tong's figure. Fu Tong? Where is he? This cowardly traitor kidnapped Ayuduo, stole the village chief's gun, and abandoned his companions. I was almost killed by him, the tall man said angrily. Dozens of village warriors looked at each other, their eyes filled with doubt. At this time, the young girl also walked out from behind Shabi, her small face as cold as ice. Fu Tong, you dare to do it but don't dare to admit it? Come out, Ayuduo shouted. The village warriors looked around. Fu Tong, who was standing on the command platform just now, was nowhere to be seen. Roar! The Shabi let out a soft roar and suddenly moved. Its 2-meter-long body suddenly flashed and once again appeared near the stairs of the city wall. It stretched out its hand and pulled out the rune vine hiding below like a chicken. With a light throw, the rune vine flew more than 10 meters and landed in the center of the city wall platform where everyone was gathered. Fu Tong, who had been thrown into confusion, staggered to his feet. He looked around, his face full of horror. All the village warriors glared at him. Fu Tong looked at the tall man and Ayuduo. Without much hesitation, he rushed forward and knelt in front of the tall man. Village chief, I was wrong. I was scared out of my wits. I did that because I was too scared. Fu Tong begged for mercy. Bang! Seeing Fu Tong like this, the tall man was even more disgusted. He didn't want to hear him speak at all. Without waiting for him to finish, he raised his foot and kicked Fu Tong's chest. Fu Tong was kicked to the ground and rolled twice. He suddenly saw stars and felt dizzy. He almost couldn't breathe. The tall man was the #1 master of Wuxia village. He used all his strength in this kick. Fu Tong, who was tall and strong, was a little overwhelmed. Fu Tong's eyes flashed with a fierce light. He stood up with his hand on his chest and looked at the tall man viciously. This kick is for Ayuduo. Men, capture Fu Tong and put in the water prison. The trial will be held tomorrow at noon. As soon as the tall man gave the order, 2 village warriors immediately went up to grab the rune vine. At this time, Fu Tong suddenly reached into his chest and took out a gun. He pointed it at the 2 village warriors. Don't come over. Don't come over. The 2 village warriors gasped when they saw the gun. They didn't dare to go forward and subconsciously took a few steps back. Fu Tong, do you still want to struggle? Put down the gun and surrender. Maybe we can let you live, the tall man said coldly. Ha, let me live? Now that things have come to this, how can I live? Do you think I'm a 3-year-old child? Ananu, I've always disliked you. Hand over all the silver bullets. Otherwise, I'll drag 2 of you down with me before I die. Fu Tong looked at the tall man and said crazily, there's still 1 bullet in the gun. Don't make any unnecessary struggles. I can promise that I won't use the death penalty on you. Ananu saw that Fu Tong was losing control of his emotions and was worried that he would do something crazy. He immediately made a promise. You won't use the death penalty? You won't die if you don't use the death penalty? Exile is worse than the death penalty. Throw him into the wilderness where there are piles of ghost corpses. Ananu, didn't you kill my uncle like this? Stop talking nonsense and hand over all the silver bullets. Otherwise, I'll drag your daughter down with me, Fu Tong said as he moved the gun and aimed at Ayuduo. Ananu moved his body slightly, wanting to block in front of his daughter. Don't move, Fu Tong shouted. His finger excitedly pulled the trigger halfway. Ananu didn't dare to move again when he saw this. He was the one who knew the power of the gun the best. This kind of gun could blow off a horse-faced man's head in 1 shot. If the target was a person, it could penetrate 4 or 5 people's bodies. The power was comparable to a small explosive stone. The energy was more concentrated and the penetrating power was stronger. Roar. Suddenly, there was a deafening roar. Shabi carried Li Daochong and walked towards Fu Tong. Damn monkey, don't move. Do you hear me? If you move again, I'll shoot, Fu Tong scolded. Shabi didn't seem to hear him. Fu Tong's eyes were bloodshot. Seeing that it was useless, he roared at Ananu. Ananu, make this damn monkey stop or I'll shoot. Fu Tong's gun was aimed at Ayuduo again. Ananu was shocked. He was about to ask Li Daochong to make the ape stop, but it was too late. Shabi suddenly grabbed at Fu Tong. The latter's eyes bulged. Without hesitation, he aimed at a Uduo and pulled the trigger. Bang! Flames spewed out of the muzzle. Ananu and the village warriors' expressions froze at that moment. Ayuduo subconsciously closed her eyes. Bang! There was a crisp sound. Under everyone's astonished gazes, the Shabi's hairy hand caught the silver bullet that was whizzing out. No, impossible, Fu Tong stammered. Shabi's hand loosened. With a thud, the flattened silver bullet fell to the ground under the violent impact. Then, a bright smile appeared on his hairy face. However, Shabi's smile was more terrifying than the arrival of the devil in Fu Tong's eyes. Shabi stretched out his finger and flicked it gently on Fu Tong's head. The latter flew backward like a kite with a broken string and slammed into the thick wooden fence. Chapter 633. As night fell, the outside of Wuxia village was filled with ghostly cries and howls. Ghost corpses wandered aimlessly outside the tall, withered wooden walls. The huge torches on the deadwood wall kept the ghost corpses away, but there were still a few wooden ghost corpses that would approach the deadwood wall. Swoosh, swoosh, thump, thump. Before the ghost corpses could climb up the deadwood, arrows shot from above pierced through their heads and nailed them to the ground. The warriors in Wuxia village who were on sentry duty that night were observing their surroundings attentively. As long as there was a potential threat, they would deal with it immediately. The deadwood wall of Wuxia village surrounded the village in a square. It was 10 meters high, and each side was about 150 meters wide. Each of the deadwood was as thick as a bucket, and some were even as thick as a water tank. The deadwood was as hard as iron. No matter how strong the ghost corpses were, they could not do anything to the deadwood wall. Even the horse-faced men could not climb over the deadwood wall. Only the most terrifying minotaurs in the vast wilderness could break through the wall made of deadwood. The west side of Wuxia village's deadwood wall was brightly lit. It had been 2 days since Fu Tong's rebellion. The trial against Fu Tong had ended. Even though Fu Tong was unscrupulous and despicable, village chief Ananu still kept his promise and did not sentence Fu Tong to death. Of course, that did not mean that Fu Tong would not die. In the end, the entire village passed a unanimous decision to exile Fu Tong. In fact, compared to the death penalty, exile was scarier. Although the death penalty was death, at least it gave you a quick death without too much pain. Exile was different. When night fell, you were chased out of the village and allowed to wander freely. The vast wilderness at night was not much different from hell. There were underworld beasts and spirits everywhere in the darkness. The ghost corpses alone could tear the most powerful warriors to pieces. A cage was slowly lowered from the west side of the deadwood wall. Fu Tong was locked inside. The cage landed on the ground, and the door opened immediately. Fu Tong looked at the darkness in front of him in fear. He could not see anything, only terrifying noises. The deadwood wall of the village was the only thing that shone in this area. Even though the huge torches were burning, the area they could illuminate was limited. The darkness was like a huge shadow monster, compressing the fire into a small ball. Looking down from the sky, Wuxia village stood alone in the middle of the barren land, like a lone boat shining in a black sea. Li Daochong stood on the withered wooden wall with a sallow face as he looked down. He was not interested in the fate of the symbol vine. Li Daochong looked into the depths of the darkness. His divine perception could only extend a few hundred meters before it was swallowed by the darkness and could not go any further. In the past 2 days, Li Daochong had gained a general understanding of this place called the Great Wilderness from the elderly villagers of Wuxia village. Although Li Daochong was an outsider with unknown origins, he had saved 8 villagers, including the village chief and his daughter. He had also captured the traitor Fu Tong. Because of these 2 things, everyone in Wuxia village was grateful to Li Daochong and treated him as a part of the village. In addition, Li Daochong had an incomparably powerful ape by his side. Gratitude and reverence were mixed together, and Li Daochong was quickly recognized. The older generation of villagers answered all of Li Daocheng's questions without holding anything back. The oldest elder in Wuxia village was 137 years old. He was not a cultivator, nor was he a cultivator. He did not even have a spirit meridian, yet he could live to 137 years old. It was definitely a miracle. However, the physiques of the people here were indeed very strong. Even in the death zone, they were still able to have such powerful vitality. Even Li Daocheng had to admire their adaptability. This place was indeed called the Great Wilderness, but this was not all. Ananu did not know what a cultivation planet was. Some of the elderly villagers knew, but they were not sure what they knew. Li Daocheng filtered and analyzed what he heard and organized it himself. This was the general information he obtained. Blackwood was a dead planet. Its location should not be in the spirit realm, but rather deep in the Hades. However, this place originally belonged to the spirit realm, but not the human realm. It used to belong to the demon realm. In fact, these villagers were not pure humans. They were mixed blood between the demon race and the human race. After a few generations, there were not many demon race characteristics left. Most of them had human characteristics. This was also the reason why their bodies were stronger. In an extreme environment like the Great Wilderness, if one did not have a good body, the death chi in the air would be enough to kill them, even without encountering any ghost corpses. As early as 3,000 years ago, this place had been occupied by the Hades. However, for some reason, Blackwood had never been invaded by the witch ghosts. It had only been transformed by the death chi of the low-level nether ghosts and turned into a dead planet. For more than 3,000 years, there had not been any great battles. Because too much time had passed, the people living here had to face all kinds of nether beasts and spirits every day. They had to worry about food. In such an environment, inheritance had long lost its meaning. No one knew what had happened to Blackwood more than 3,000 years ago. The only thing that could be confirmed was that this was once a cultivation planet where the demon race and the human race lived together. However, its level should not be very high. According to the villagers, there was no earth-shattering battle at all. It was as if this place was just engulfed by the death chi. Then no one cared about it, and it just went with the flow. Just like that, it developed on its own for more than 3,000 years and became the primitive tribe it was now. Li Daocheng calculated for 2 days and estimated the size of this dead planet. It was about 300 times the size of Blue Bay Star. However, the gravity of Blackwood Planet was not particularly strong. Among the cultivation planets that Li Daocheng had been to, the Dark Parasol Planet had the strongest gravity. It was about 15 times the gravity of Blue Bay Star. Although Blackwood Planet was much bigger than Blue Bay Star, its gravity was only about 5 to 6 times that of Blue Bay Star. This meant that the density of Blackwood Planet was not high. There might even be empty space in the center. Li Daocheng's current condition was very bad. The poison was slowly flowing toward his heart, and the poison had already infected his primordial spirit. Although Li Daocheng could only unleash the strength of a mid-stage Jin Dan, it was not Jin Dan that was circling in his inner world, but his primordial spirit. However, his primordial spirit was too weak and could not unleash much power. The thunder primordial spirit had almost disappeared. At this moment, Shabi still maintained its ape size and stood beside Li Daocheng. Its pair of pure black eyes seemed to burn with a flame. When it looked into the darkness, the flame would quickly burn. Whether it was ghost corpses, horse-faced men, or other nether beasts or spirits, these things were nothing in Shabi's eyes. They were not much worse than mosquito legs. Shabi was too lazy to eat them. However, Shabi's sharp intuition told it that in the depths of the endless darkness, there must be a powerful ghost that it could eat. Li Daocheng touched his chest. He had to find a target that he could kill as soon as possible. Just like Shabi, it did not make much difference whether Li Daocheng killed ghost corpses and horse-faced men or not. The spirit chi was not enough for Li Daocheng to consume. Fu Tong's eyes were filled with fear as he walked out of the cage. However, his expression suddenly became distorted. He was even more terrifying than an evil ghost. The cage was pulled back onto the wall. Everyone looked coldly at Fu Tong. He had only himself to blame for being exiled. He had no one to blame but himself. Even the kind-hearted Audiobook did not show any pity or sympathy when she looked at Futong. Yaya, a ghost corpse without half a face and covered in rotten flesh, walked out of the darkness. The ghost corpse walked step by step toward Futong. The smell of living things was a powerful stimulant for every ghost corpse. Futong kicked the ghost corpse that came close to him into pieces. Then, a few more ghost corpses walked out of the darkness to the fire. Futong retreated to the bottom of the city wall. As the most powerful warrior in Wuxia village, Futong still had some strength. It was not a problem for him to deal with more than 10 ghost corpses alone. Futong did indeed do so. However, there was no end to the ghost corpses that walked out of the darkness. Being exiled did not mean certain death. It depended on whether you had the good fortune to survive. This was the same principle as the Shanghua Federation exiling felons to 13 Spectre. Instead of letting you die a useless death, it was better to do something useful before you died. Futong knew that his chances of survival were very small, but he still worked hard. More than 20 ghost corpses were killed by Futong. His breathing began to quicken. The ghost corpses were still pouring out. Futong took out the weapons on his back. They were the weapons that the exiles had chosen from the village's armory before they were exiled. However, there were too many ghost corpses. It was impossible to kill them all. Futong gritted his teeth. Just as he was about to charge out and run northwest, a scream came from the darkness. The sound was very close. Futong's eyes twitched violently, and his face twitched twice. In the darkness, a horse's hoof stepped into the fire. Then, the other parts gradually became clear. A tall, horse-faced man that was more than 2.5 meters tall appeared under the fire. Futong's heart was completely cold. He knew that he had no chance to escape. Hee-ha! Futong suddenly laughed maniacally. He turned to look at the top of the wall, at Ananu. Ananu, do you know what this is? Futong raised his right hand. There seemed to be a reflection on his fingers. Ananu was silent. He looked down at Futong. This is called a storage ring. It's a treasure passed down from our ancestors. It can store some items, such as this, Futong said as he pressed a button on the storage ring. The moment the item appeared, Ananu sucked in a breath of cold air. Futong, you're crazy. Crazy? Of course not. I just don't want to be too lonely on the road to hell. Ha. Futong laughed again. Not only Ananu, but all the villagers on the wall had fear in their eyes. Blood Soul Incense, someone exclaimed. Li Daochong only knew what it was when he heard the name. Yesterday, he had heard an old man tell a story and mention the Blood Soul Incense. After this thing burned, it would emit a very strong smell of blood and human souls. It could spread thousands of miles and attract all the nether beasts and ghosts in the area. The stronger the nether beast, the easier it was to be confused by the smell of the Blood Soul Incense. Stop! Damn it, Futong, do you want to kill the entire village? Futong ignored the shouts. He suddenly rubbed the weapon in his hand against the ground. Sparks splashed on the Blood Soul Incense, and it instantly burned. The villagers on the wall were dumbfounded. In a few seconds, the watermelon-sized Blood Soul Incense burned into nothingness. Everything evaporated into the air and quickly spread out. In just a few seconds, Moo! A terrifying cry came from the depths of the darkness. Father, it's the Minotaur, Audiobook said with a trembling voice. At the end of the phone, oh, ad-free Xian 81 Chinese. Chapter 634. If the ghost corpses were a pack of wolves, then the horse-faced men were the lions of the wasteland. However, the horse-faced men were not the kings of this land. The Minotaurs were. At least in the area that the villagers of Wuxia village were familiar with, they were the strongest kings. If the horse-faced men were lions, then the Minotaurs were tyrannosaurs. They were terrifying existences that struck fear into all the villages. The defenses of all the villages in the southern wasteland could fend off most of the nether beasts and ghosts. The only thing they could not deal with were the Minotaurs. These 7-meter-tall nether beasts had evolved from the giant devil demon clan and the ox demon clan of Blackwood Star. Fortunately, there were not many of them, otherwise the southern wasteland would have been flattened by them. However, the Minotaurs would not attack the villages because the villages were a great threat to them. The human villages were at the top of the food chain in the southern wasteland. A single village was enough to fight the Minotaurs. Of course, most of the time, both sides would suffer. Not only were the Minotaurs powerful, they also possessed a certain amount of dead soul consciousness. This gave them the ability to sense danger. The Minotaurs would not attack a medium-sized village unless they had no other choice. They would only attack when they discovered that the village had declined and could be easily crushed. The Minotaurs' food was usually the desolate beasts that were hidden underground and had not been completely contaminated by the aura of death, or the human teams that were out hunting. Although the Minotaurs were large, they were very good at using camouflage. Thus, when they lay motionless, it was impossible to discover them. People would only think that they were mounds of dirt that could be seen everywhere in the wasteland. Fu Tang's crazy act of igniting the ghost incense caused the villagers of Wuxia village to fall into panic. A deep roar came from the distance, striking the hearts of all the villagers. It was as if it wanted to shatter their hearts. Under the illumination of the giant torches on the deadwood wall, Fu Tang's entire face was distorted, and he muttered crazily, "Die. All of you die. Hee, if I can't live, you can't live either." Fu Tang looked as if he had gone mad, but he did not give up. Instead, he suddenly jumped up and landed on the giant torch that was inserted into the withered wooden wall. Fu Tang was not afraid of death. At this point, he knew that he would die without a doubt. However, he wanted to see Anina die before he died. He wanted to see Wuxia village flattened. "Fu Tang, you lunatic. You won't even let your family go?" Aninu shouted in disbelief. "Family? Ha ha ha. Aninu, don't you know that I don't have family? For as long as I can remember, the Fu family members have been dying one after another. The Fu family has contributed so much to Wuxia village, but what happened in the end? Half of them died in battle, and the other half were exiled. My father was torn in half by a horse-faced man to save a child. No one remembers this contribution. The Fu family did not let Wuxia village down. In the end, when my uncle was running for the position of village chief, he was exiled because of a little trick. Aninu, you despicable man. I must see you die today." Fu Tang's eyes were bloodshot. "Fu Tang, your father was a hero. Wuxia village will always remember him. His memorial tablet will always be placed at the highest position in the village's ancestral hall. Your uncle had no problem running for the position of village chief, but he colluded with Sang Duo village for the sake of his contribution. He promised to sacrifice 5 young girls in the village to the warriors of Sang Duo village. Don't you know that every young girl in the village is the most precious treasure? He purposely let more than 10 ghost corpses in and almost caused irreparable damage. According to the village rules, he can only be exiled. Aninu glared at Fu Tang. He regretted not sentencing Fu Tang to death. Otherwise, this situation would not have happened. As if you, Aninu, can't do anything. Cut the crap and wait for your death." Fu Tang snorted coldly. Moo! Another deep roar was heard. This time, it was clearly much closer. Hundreds of ghost corpses had already gathered under the withered wood wall. More ghost corpses were rushing toward Wuxia village in the darkness. 3 horse-faced men had already appeared. They were not rushing toward the withered wood wall like the ghost corpses. Instead, they stood at the edge of the area illuminated by the fire and waited quietly for an opportunity. A wisp of grayish-white figure floated out of the darkness. It looked like a wolf. Li Daochong recognized it at a glance. It was a spectral ghost, a wolf ghost follower. Soon, dozens of wolf ghost followers gathered at the edge of the circle of light. The appearance of this kind of dark ghost reminded Li Daochong of the difficult times when he had just woken up. However, when he thought about it carefully, his situation did not seem to have been really good. It had always been very difficult. Even now, things were not very optimistic. The dark ghosts and dark beasts that had appeared so far were not a threat to Li Daocheng, even if he was poisoned and weak. However, he knew that this mysterious forgotten land of the dead could not only have these ghosts. Intuition told Li Daocheng that there was definitely something here that he could not deal with in his current state. However, everything here was very strange. Logically speaking, this was the Hades. However, more than 3,000 years had passed, and this place had never been disturbed. It was an independent existence. Not only did the people here not know what the spirit realm and the human realm were, they also did not know what the Hades were. After more than 3,000 years, the history of the past had been completely swallowed up by time. The people here only thought that the world was born like this, and that this was all there was to it. The smell of the spectral incense was like a drug to the dark beasts and dark ghosts. Just smelling a little of it would cause them to instantly enter a frenzied state of hunger. In just a few minutes, Wuxia village was surrounded by a huge group of ghost corpses and ghosts. There were 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. If it were not for the limited range of the fire, the villagers standing on the withered wood wall would have been paralyzed with fear. The darkness could not block Li Daocheng's vision. A weak blue light flashed in his eyes, and he saw everything. Even the horse-faced men had gathered dozens of them in a very short time. There was no need for the minotaurs to appear. With such a huge group, Wuxia village would be drowned. Wuxia village only had 158 people. Excluding the old, the weak, the sick, and the disabled, there were 110 able-bodied people left. In a land like the Great Wilderness, it was difficult for the old, the weak, the sick, and the disabled to survive. Therefore, there were not many old people in each village. The average lifespan of the people here was not more than 55 years old. However, the reason for their short lifespan was not because of their weak bodies. Almost 95% of the people here died of unnatural causes. In fact, the fertility of the Great Wilderness's humans was very high. An adult woman could give birth to 1 or 2 babies every year. Moreover, the pregnancy cycle was shorter than that of the spirit realm's humans. It only took 6 months. However, even so, the population of the Great Wilderness was still decreasing slowly and orderly. To Li Daocheng, everything here was very magical and mysterious. Ananu quickly issued a red alert, and the entire village entered a level 1 defense state. The old, the weak, the sick, and the disabled all took refuge in the underground tunnels. All the able-bodied people, regardless of gender, picked up their weapons and prepared for battle. The village's 15 explosive stone catapults were also ready to go. The village's stockpile of more than 300 explosive stones were all taken out. There were tens of thousands of villages like Wuxia village in the Great Wilderness in the south. They were scattered all over the place, and there were some big and some small. Wuxia village was considered a weak middle-sized village. It was considered a middle-sized village with a population between 150 to 250 people. If it exceeded 250 people, it would be considered a large-sized village. Li Daocheng had seen a map before. It was the only map in Wuxia village. It marked the area within a 600-kilometer radius of Wuxia village. In such a large area, there were more than 100 villages. Wuxia village's known area was only so big. Beyond this area, there was a blank space and nothing was known. Li Daocheng found it strange that these villages did not unite. That way, their safety would be greatly increased. However, Li Daocheng soon realized that it was almost impossible for them to unite in this great wilderness. This was because the more people gathered, the more food they would consume. Other than hunting, there was no other way to obtain food here. Not only that, the local people's tribal consciousness was too stubborn and could not be shaken. Although they would help each other and fight against the ghost zombie horde, it was only temporary. Once it was over, they would be on their own and would be wary of each other. Sometimes, there would even be wars between the villages. It was mainly because of limited resources or because there were too few girls in the village and the population was in danger of decreasing. Moo. When the third deep moo was heard, the ground trembled slightly. The moo pulled Li Daocheng's thoughts back to reality. In the great wilderness hundreds of meters away, a huge object was moving towards Wuxia village at a constant speed. Naturally, the villagers could not see it. Li Daocheng's vision was not obstructed by the darkness. The appearance of the Minotaur was clearly visible to him. It was almost the same as the Minotaur that he had killed on Planet Crimson Sunday. Li Daocheng touched his chin. A glimmer of interest flashed through his eyes. The Minotaur's level was at the level of a ghost beast. Killing it would convert a considerable amount of spiritual energy. The ghost zombie horde and ghost horde that kept coming did not attack Wuxia village. They seemed to be waiting for something. However, they seemed to be getting more and more anxious. Then came the fourth moo. The ghost zombie horde suddenly went berserk. They let out terrifying squeaks and rushed towards the withered wood wall, scrambling to climb up. The ghost horde was much more convenient. With a drift, they flew up to the 10-meter-tall withered wood wall and attacked the villagers on top. To deal with the ghost horde, the Wuxia village warriors used a type of silver powder. Once the ghost came into contact with the silver powder, its soul would immediately become unstable and disappear. The horse-faced men roared and rushed towards Wuxia village from all directions. They could easily jump a few meters high, but the 10-meter-tall withered wood wall was still a little too high for them. However, the ghost zombies that rushed up first became the horse-faced men's stepping stones. With the help of the ghost zombies, the horse-faced men had the possibility of directly jumping onto the withered wood wall. Everyone in Wuxia village looked hopeless. "Father, are we going to die?" Ayode's pretty face was pale and bloodless. At that moment, her mind was blank. Anna did not say a word. His eyes were like a pool of stagnant water. A horse-faced man jumped up and landed in front of him. He did not react at all. Faced with such a large number of ghost zombies, horse-faced men, and ghost horde, Anna knew the fight had been destroyed. It was like a rabbit meeting a pride of lions. It was not a matter of having no chance of winning. It was simply a matter of being crushed into pieces and nothing would be left in the end. "Village chief, it's dangerous," a young villager shouted. "Ha ha ha. Ananu, I said I would watch you die. I want you to die before me." Fu Tong's maniacal laughter suddenly rang out. Everyone had almost forgotten about him. Unexpectedly, Fu Tong, who was sitting on the giant torch, was still alive. At that moment, 3 ghost zombies were lying on his body and gnawing. One was gnawing on his thigh, one was gnawing on his shoulder, and the last one was lying on his stomach. With one bite, even his intestines were bitten out. However, Fu Tong was very happy at that moment. He was dead for sure, but Ananu would die before him. The horse-faced man landed less than 2 meters in front of Ananu. As long as the white bone club in his hand smashed down, Ananu's head would immediately be smashed into pieces. Mobile phone. Oh, ad-free accent 81 Chinese. Chapter 635. Fu Tong had a crazy smile on his face. He had achieved his goal. He wanted the entire Wuxia village to die with him. It was worth it to die like this. Seeing that the horse-faced man was about to smash Ananu into pieces. Suddenly, a dark green figure flashed over. A dark light flashed past, and the horse-faced man was instantly cleaved into 2 halves. Poochie. Green blood spurted out. The horse-faced man stared with a pair of dead fish eyes. His stiff face revealed an expression of disbelief. Whoosh! Another Tsang ink light flashed, and the horse-faced man's head flew into the air. Anna looked at the pale Li Daocheng in shock. The powerful horse-faced man was cut down by this young man. This was the king of the vast wilderness. The other villagers were also shocked by this scene. They had always thought that this young man relied on the ancient ape and was not that strong. Moreover, this young man seemed to be seriously injured and poisoned. No! A heart-wrenching roar came from below. Fu Tong's eyes bulged and his face was ferocious. However, as soon as this roar ended, another ghost corpse climbed up and bit Fu Tong's neck. Gurgle, bright red blood spurted out. His windpipe was also bitten off. He could only breathe out, but not in. Fu Tong's consciousness quickly disappeared. His face was twisted as he took his last breath with extreme reluctance. on the withered wooden wall. Anna looked at Li Daochong in disbelief. After killing the horse-faced man, the latter looked no different from killing a chicken. He still had an indifferent expression on his face. Li Daochong turned a deaf ear to the surrounding gazes. He waved Song ink in his hand. Whoosh! A round of Song ink light flashed out with a 10-meter-long blade light. All the ghost corpses in the cross-section were cut in half by this blade. In an instant, hundreds of ghost corpses were eliminated. The villagers opened their mouths wide, as if they had seen the most amazing thing in the world. Ayodwa's gentle little mouth opened slightly. A pair of big eyes flashed, and a question mark floated in her mind. Was he still human? In Ayodwa's world, how could a single person cause such great destruction? What was that round of saber light? Li Daochong swung his saber and appeared elsewhere. The other horse-faced man who had jumped onto the withered tree wall was chopped up by Li Daochong before he could stand firm. At this moment, Shabi also moved. It opened its mouth and roared. Its two furry fists violently pounded its chest a few times. It then jumped down and jumped into the group of ghost corpses below. The Shabi had no appetite for ghost corpses, but since its master ordered it to get rid of them, it had to get rid of them. Shabi spat out a white flame from its mouth, and the ghost corpses in front of it were instantly devoured and evaporated. Ghosts that came into contact with the white flames would also be burned into nothingness. In just a few breaths of time, the man and the monkey had turned the situation around. The ghost corpses, wraiths, and horse-faced men under the withered wooden wall to the west were quickly cleaned up. The dark beasts and ghosts that were incomparably terrifying in the eyes of the villagers were unable to withstand a single blow from the man and the monkey. They were swept away like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves, leaving nothing behind. Li Daochong and Shabi became cleaners. After sweeping the west side, they swept the east side. After sweeping the east side, they swept the south side and then the north side. The tens of thousands of ghost corpses and wraiths around Wuxia village were quickly cleaned up. With such a large number of ghost corpses and wraiths, Li Daochong alone had killed at least 2/3 of them. He had only obtained a few strands of spirit energy. To Li Daochong, this amount of spirit energy was not even enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. Shabi also felt that it was not satisfying. These ghost corpses were not much stronger than ants. A person killing tens of thousands of ants did not require much energy at all. Only the horse-faced men could slightly arouse Shabi's interest. They could barely be considered as non-nutritious junk food and chew on a few bites. The villagers of Wuxia village stood on the withered wooden wall and stared at Li Daochong and Shabi in shock. The look in their eyes changed from disbelief to reverence. The old, weak, sick, and disabled who were hiding in the underground passage also rushed to the withered wooden wall after receiving the news. The unprecedented crisis of Wuxia village was resolved just like that. Moreover, it was resolved in such an unimaginable way. An old man held a withered wooden cane with trembling hands and knelt down in front of Li Daochong and Shabi's backs. Immortals, immortals. The old man's wrinkled face was filled with sincerity as he kowtowed excitedly. The other old men followed suit and knelt down. The other villagers looked at each other when they saw this. However, when they heard the old man's murmurs, their eyes were filled with shock and fear. They quickly knelt down as well. "Father, we actually saved an immortal," Ayuduo stuttered. Anna looked at Li Daochong's back in awe. His mind was a little dazed. Thump, thump. Just as all the villagers knelt down, the withered wooden wall suddenly shook. Heavy footsteps came from afar. A large minotaur entered the circle of light from the darkness. It was holding the leg bone of an unknown desolate beast in its hand. It was as big as a tree, and the bone was covered in spikes. It looked like a white mace. When the minotaur stopped, the sound of heavy footsteps did not disappear. A second minotaur appeared, followed by a third. There were 3 minotaur monsters attracted by the blood soul incense. The villagers who had just breathed a sigh of relief felt their hearts in their throats again. 1 minotaur was enough to destroy the entire village, not to mention 3. In a vast wilderness, Minotaur monsters rarely appeared in pairs. Village chief, should we let the immortal retreat with us first? Someone suggested. That's right, village chief. No matter how powerful the immortal is, he can't defeat 3 Minotaur monsters. As long as the immortal is here, we have to take good care of him. If we can get the immortal's protection, Wuxia village will soon become the most powerful village in the southern wilderness, an old man said earnestly. Ananu's body shook. He looked at the old man who spoke, as if he had been enlightened. That's right. If they could get the immortal's protection, Wuxia village's predicament would be easily solved. They would not have to worry about not being able to develop. Ananu took a deep breath and said loudly, Immortally, come back quickly. The Minotaur monsters are too strong. Let's avoid them first. There was no response. Li Daochong acted as if he did not hear him. He just stood side by side with Shabi, looking at the 3 behemoths in front of him with interest. Li Daochong and Shabi licked their lips at the same time, as if they had seen some sweet and delicious food. Ghost beasts could be converted into a lot of spiritual qi. Li Daochong only had one thought now: recover as soon as possible. When he was in his best condition, he would see if he could expel the poison from his body. Moo! The first Minotaur monster to arrive let out a roar and smashed the white bone mace in its hand toward Li Daochong. The second Minotaur spat out a ball of black flame. Li Daochong's eyes flashed. He did not dodge at all. He swung Tsang Ink and slashed out. The black flame and the blade collided and canceled each other out. Li Daochong suddenly stomped on the ground. The ground exploded with a bang, and he shot out like a cannonball. Li Daochong jumped high and landed on the head of the first Minotaur. Tsang Ink pointed the tip of the blade downward and stabbed hard. The thick and heavy Minotaur skull was like a pile of mud in front of Tsang Ink, easily piercing in. The blade was completely submerged, leaving only the hilt exposed. The Minotaur let out a tragic howl. Moo! Green blood spurted out of its mouth. If it was just an external injury, this would not have caused fatal damage to the Minotaur. The head of a nether beast was not its core. It did not matter if it was pierced through. At least it was difficult to kill them with pure physical damage. However, Li Daochong's blade quickly invaded the Minotaur's body with the power of Yang Thunder. Li Daochong pulled out his blade and jumped down. As he landed, the back of the Minotaur's head exploded with a bang. Its huge body fell down with a loud bang. Li Daochong jumped again the moment he landed. With Tsang Ink in his hand, he slashed at another Minotaur. The villagers' mouths were wide open. The Minotaur that was unscathed, even under the bombardment of the exploding stones, could not block this young man's blade. It's an immortal treasure. It must be an immortal treasure. The old man who knelt first exclaimed. Ananu's face trembled slightly. He continued, First Elder, that blade can't be an immortal treasure. Immortally has been carrying it on his back. I have carefully observed it. The blade is rusty, as if it hasn't been polished for a long time. It doesn't have any spirituality at all. Is that so? The first elder was puzzled. His turbid eyes flashed with confusion. Ananu was right. After Tsang Ink entered this world, it did lose its spirituality and became dim. It looked like an old long blade that had been buried deep underground for many years. Not only did it have no characteristics, but it was also covered with a layer of rust. Li Daochong could not even drive Tsang Ink. He could only use it as a weapon. Fortunately, when he used the 9-crack saber technique, it was not affected. He could still use the blade aura. The 2 Minotaur monsters were like nightmares in the eyes of the villagers. Just like that, they were split by Li Daochong. The whole process was simple, straightforward, and relaxing. Beep. Killed 2 ox. Minotaur. Soul. Soul power. Obtained. Converted. Spiritual qi. The trembling and stuttering prompt sounded. This made Li Daochong very annoyed. For the past 2 days, he had tried everything he could think of, but he still could not find out what was wrong with the hot-blooded upgrader. Although so far, other than the stuttering and trembling, there was nothing wrong with it, Li Daochong still felt that something was wrong. There must be something wrong with the hot-blooded upgrader. 2 streams of spiritual qi gushed out of Li Daochong's body. However, his cultivation showed no signs of improvement. It was still maintained at the mid-stage of the Jindan. Logically speaking, even if the two Minotaur monsters could not restore Li Daochong much, the amount of spiritual qi they converted should be considerable. However, Li Daochong did not feel any recovery in his body. There was no difference from before. It was just that there was a little more spiritual qi. The third Minotaur was killed by Shabi. At this moment, Shabi was lying on the Minotaur's body, enjoying its meal. Li Daochong only felt upset. Not being able to find a reason made him feel extremely uneasy. He glanced into the depths of the darkness. After confirming that there were no other underworld beasts nearby, he gently leaped back onto the withered wooden wall. As soon as Li Daochong landed, he looked at the villagers who were kneeling on the ground with a dumbfounded expression. The few elders kept kowtowing to him. "What are you doing? Get up." "No, great immortal. How can we, mere mortals, stand together with you?" The great elder hurriedly said. "Just get up when I tell you to." "I'm not a great immortal." Li Daochong frowned. Mobile phone. Oh, ad-free accent 81 Chinese. Chapter 636. Great immortal, I wouldn't dare. The old man lowered his head even more. If you don't get up, I'll slaughter all of you." Li Daochong was already in a bad mood because the poison could not be removed, and he did not know what was wrong with the hot-blooded upgrader. All the villagers felt a buzz in their heads, and they almost fainted. It was as if their eardrums had been pierced. At the same time, the sound wave brought about a wave of air, and all the kneeling villagers were blown to their feet. The villagers' hearts trembled, and they looked at Li Daochong with fear instead of respect. Li Daochong's murderous aura surged out of his body, and the villagers remembered that he could easily kill tens of thousands of ghost corpses and minotaurs, let alone them. The old man saw that the situation was not good, and realized how ridiculous his thoughts were. How could the great immortal be manipulated by others? If he angered the great immortal, it would be the end of Wuxia village. The village could still fight against the ghost corpses, horse-faced men, and even the minotaurs. However, against this man who killed the minotaurs in seconds, Wuxia village and the entire southern wasteland were nothing but ants. The old man was the oldest in Wuxia village, and he was respected as the Grand Elder. He had lived for more than 100 years, and he had heard from the elders of the previous generation that on the other side of the wasteland, there were self-cultivators who could go anywhere, and they were like immortals. Ghost corpses and horse-faced men were just piles of *T in front of them, and they could be easily killed with a wave of their hand. The Grand Elder hurriedly said, "Please calm down, great immortal. We wouldn't dare disobey your orders." Li Daochong naturally would not argue with these mortals who lived in the land of death. Seeing that they were no longer kneeling, his anger had mostly dissipated. Li Daochong did not want to be high-profile, but now he could not be. Li Daochong's top priority was to remove the poison in his body, and then he would study the hot-blooded upgrader. The day before yesterday, when Li Daochong was feeling drowsy, a witch doctor in the village had treated him. Li Daochong rubbed something on his body and took a type of herbal medicine. At that time, Li Daochong felt a bit better. However, the effects of the drug were short-lived and disappeared after about an hour. Li Daochong had asked the witch doctor where the herb had come from, and the answer he got was that he had picked it up. At first, he didn't believe it. Later, he found out from Ananu that it was indeed picked up. Moreover, it was something that happened decades ago. The village chief at that time had led the village warriors out to hunt, and he had plundered it from a group of dead people. These dead people were not villagers from the great wasteland in the south. Judging from their attire, they should have come from the great wasteland in the east, which was more prosperous. However, he had no idea why they had come all the way to the southern wasteland. They had brought a lot of good stuff with them. Among them, herbs were the most miraculous. At that time, there were only about 70 people left in Wuxia village. The situation in the village was deteriorating day by day. However, Wuxia village was able to catch a breather after receiving the spoils of war. The herbs on these corpses all had notes on what kind of injuries they were used for. There were a total of more than 100 types of herbs. The amount was not a lot, but but a small amount was enough to treat most injuries and illnesses. Therefore, these herbs had been carefully preserved and used for decades. Now, there were not many left, and they were extremely precious. Ananu's sincerity was evident by the fact that he was willing to give some to Li Daocheng. Of course, Ananu had done it because Li Daocheng had saved his and his daughter's life. He also wanted to be on good terms with Li Daocheng. After all, he had a powerful ancient ape by his side. Ananu had wanted to rope Li Daocheng in to become a member of Wuxia village. He had even thought of marrying his daughter to him. The ancient ape was too powerful. If he could keep Li Daocheng here, Wuxia village would have a much better life in the future. Before tonight, Ananu would never have thought that Li Daocheng would be more powerful than the ancient ape. How could an immortal like him stay in Wuxia village, which was a godforsaken place? It was even more impossible for him to take a fancy to his daughter. The herb that was given to Li Daocheng was the last of the Wuxia village's stock. At the time, the witch doctor had only prescribed the medicine according to Li Daocheng's symptoms. Li Daocheng had asked what the herb was called, but the witch doctor had stammered and could not give him a reason. Li Daocheng had asked the witch doctor to bring him to the storehouse, but the witch doctor had run away and only said that outsiders were not allowed to enter. Li Daocheng wanted to rest for a few days before asking Ananu to bring him in to have a look. He was not in a hurry. Now that the villagers had recognized him as a great immortal, he might as well take the opportunity to have a look. Ananu, do you know the name of the herb you gave me the day before yesterday? Li Daocheng asked. Ananu was stunned for a moment. Then he said respectfully, Great immortal, those herbs only state their uses but don't have a name, because they don't come from a southern wilderness. Even the witch doctor doesn't know these herbs. Li Daocheng nodded slightly, then said, Tell everyone to disperse. Take me to the storehouse to have a look. Ananu's body trembled slightly. He glanced at the great elder and seemed to hesitate. When he received the latter's affirmative gaze, he immediately said, Please follow me, great immortal. With that, Ananu walked straight down the wall, with Li Daocheng following closely behind. After a while, Li Daocheng followed Ananu to the largest wooden house in the center of the village. The other houses around were obviously much smaller than this wooden house. The moment Ananu opened the door of the wooden house, a strong medicinal fragrance wafted out from inside. Li Daocheng's eyes moved slightly, revealing a hint of surprise. There was the smell of 1,000-year-old spirit herbs. There was actually a 1,000-year-old spirit herb growing in this wasteland. This was somewhat strange. The environment that was close to the Hades was no longer suitable for spirit herbs to grow. After more than 3,000 years, even the strongest spirit herb could not withstand the erosion and should have withered long ago. Li Daocheng walked into the wooden house with a strong sense of curiosity. If compared to the other places in the village, the decorations here could be described as exquisite and luxurious. However, in Li Daocheng's eyes, it was still too shabby. More than 10 rows of shelves were neatly arranged. The floor was covered with some kind of wild beast fur. There was a simple spirit formation in the house that was specially used to adjust the temperature, and a spirit stone was placed on top of it. There were even spirit stones. Li Daocheng's eyes narrowed slightly. Ananu carefully glanced at Li Daocheng with a nervous expression. There was a reason why they were not allowed to enter the storehouse. It contained almost all of Wuxia village's secrets. More than 50 years ago, Wuxia village was facing the danger of extinction. If it were not for a windfall, Wuxia village would have been wiped out from the southern wilderness. Wuxia village did not only obtain magical herbs from the dead outsiders, but also many things that only existed in legends. For example, spirit formations, spirit stones, and space rings. Ananu was very worried that Li Daocheng would want to rob Wuxia village of its secrets after seeing them. If that happened, Wuxia village would be doomed once again. The village had relied on these magical things to develop and strengthen bit by bit over the years. If the great immortal really wanted to take these things away, there was nothing Ananu could do. Li Daocheng glanced at the spirit stone placed in the center of the spirit formation and quickly looked away. It was just a normal spirit stone. How could Li Daocheng be interested in it? Even if it was an entire vein of normal spirit stones, Li Daocheng would not be interested in it at all. Li Daocheng's attention quickly focused on the shelf. There were various medicine bottles on it. Each bottle was labeled with its purpose, but there was no name. Li Daocheng was not an alchemist, so his understanding of spirit herbs was limited. He could not tell the name of the spirit herbs based on their smell. The only thing Li Daocheng could be sure of was that the raw materials of these herbs were of high quality. Li Daocheng picked up a random bottle of herbs and opened it to take a look. He put it under his nose and sniffed it. He could not help but shake his head slightly. Li Daocheng immediately took out a spiritual brain from his space ring and began to analyze the ingredients of the herbs. Unfortunately, Li Daocheng's spiritual brain was not exclusive to him, so it could not accurately analyze the ingredients of the herbs. It could only roughly calculate the utilization rate of the spirit herbs. The final analysis result was similar to Li Daocheng's expectations. The loss of attributes of the spirit herbs was as high as 95%. In other words, the person who made the herbs had no skills at all. It could even be said that they did not understand medicine at all. At least, they did not understand medicine refinement. After grinding and boiling the herbs, they were blended together and mixed according to the ratio through some simple procedures. Using spirit herbs as ordinary herbs, Li Daocheng had never seen such an extravagant pharmaceutical process. This was too wasteful. Anino looked at the spiritual brain in Li Daocheng's hand in amazement, as if he was looking at a flying object. What is this thing? A big question mark appeared in Aninu's mind. After Li Daocheng put down the bottle of herbs, his divine sense condensed together and began to concentrate on searching for the herb he took the day before yesterday. The space was only so big, and there were only more than 100 kinds of herbs. Li Daocheng soon smelled a familiar smell. Walking to the row of shells in the middle, Li Daocheng saw an ivory bottle in the bottom row. He picked it up, opened it, and sniffed. Li Daocheng's eyes lit up. Found it. Chapter 637. The ivory bottle was empty, but there were some residues stuck to the wall of the bottle. Although it was very little, it was enough for Li Daocheng to identify the smell. There was a piece of paper pasted on the outside of the bottle with a line of small words written on it. Clear heat, detoxify, and refresh the mind. Li Daocheng blushed with shame. The ointment made of 1,000-year-old spiritual herbs was actually used for this purpose. How King extravagant. Li Daocheng immediately used the spiritual brain to analyze it and quickly obtained the results. The ointment in the small bottle was made of 7 herbs. The spiritual brain stored all the known spiritual herbs in the Shanghua Federation, as well as some spiritual herbs from other cultivation countries in the spiritual realm. There were millions of them, but even so, the spiritual brain could not analyze any of the 7 herbs. In other words, these 7 spiritual herbs did not belong to any of the millions of spiritual herbs stored in the spiritual brain. Li Daocheng looked at the analysis results and could not help but feel a little regretful. This greatly increased the difficulty of finding these herbs. In addition, Li Daocheng did not know whether the mixture of the 7 herbs was effective for him, or if only one or a few of them were effective. Li Daocheng suddenly missed Wei Beitong. If he was here, he might be able to find the key. At present, Li Daocheng could only gather the 7 herbs. Moreover, they were 7 herbs with no names. The only way to find them was by smell. Fortunately, Li Daocheng's spiritual consciousness had recovered, and it was not difficult to accurately remember the smell of the 7 herbs. Li Daocheng put away the spiritual brain and put the ivory bottle into his storage ring. Aninu had been standing respectfully and quietly on the side, not even daring to breathe. Aninu could not understand Li Daocheng's every move at all. He did not know what this immortal was doing. After Li Daocheng finished everything, he turned to Aninu and asked, "Do you know the origin of the people who carried these items back then?" Aninu shook his head blankly. "Great immortal, I'm only in my early 40s this year. I wasn't even born more than 50 years ago." Li Daocheng continued to ask, "Are the people who brought the items back more than 50 years ago gone?" Aninu's eyes flickered as if he was hesitating. However, The invisible pressure emitted from Li Daocheng's body made him not dare to lie. He paused for a moment and said, "There is still one alive. The others are dead." Li Daocheng's eyes lit up. "Where is he?" Ananu replied, "It's the Great Elder." Li Daocheng was delighted. "Bring him to me." Ananu immediately turned around and went out. After a while, he returned, and the Great Elder followed him into the wooden house. Although Li Daocheng was not an alchemist, he had refined pills with Wei Beitong before. Thus, he had some understanding of alchemy. There were many types of spiritual herbs, but Li Daocheng had the hot-blooded level-up device. Thus, as long as he came into contact with it, he could instantly record it. However, Li Daocheng did not recognize any of the spiritual herbs here. "Are you one of the people who picked up these items back then?" Li Daocheng asked directly. "Yes, Great Immortal. I was one of the people who picked up these items back then." The Great Elder lowered his head and answered truthfully. "Do you know the origin of those corpses?" Li Daocheng continued to ask. Great Immortal, I don't dare to say that I know. I can only roughly guess that those people are not from the vast wilderness. Most of them are from the other side of the Endless Mountain Range." The Great Elder replied. "Endless Mountain Range?" Li Daocheng heard this name again. After coming here, the Endless Mountain Range was the name Li Daocheng heard the most, and everyone who mentioned this name would have a flash of fear on their face. It was as if that place was the abyss of hell. The reason why the Endless Mountain Range was called the Endless Mountain Range was because there was no end to the mountain range. There were many powerful people in the vast wilderness who went in, not to mention those who went in and did not return. Those who went in and out were few in number. Most of them came out decades later. When they went in, they were only young people. When they came out, they were already old people with one foot in the grave. Moreover, these people said that they had walked very far, but there was still no end to it. In the end, they had no choice but to return. They walked for a very long time. Being able to return to the vast wilderness was simply a miracle. Li Daocheng frowned slightly. "Didn't you say that the Endless Mountain Range has no end? And there are ghosts and devils everywhere in there. How did those people come from the other side? Or is there really another side?" The Great Elder immediately replied, "Great Immortal, the Endless Mountain Range is not as scary as the rumors say. There are indeed powerful ghosts and beasts in there, but they are not much stronger than the Minotaurs. According to what I know, the scariest thing in the Endless Mountain Range is the ghosts. They can go anywhere, but for some reason, those ghosts are unable to leave the Endless Mountain Range. Otherwise, the people in the vast wilderness would have been sucked dry by those ghosts. The Endless Mountain Range is not without end. It's just that it is too big. Unless one can fly, it is impossible to cross such a long distance with just a desolate beast as a mount." Li Daocheng nodded. Then he asked, "Then do you know what is on the other side of the Endless Mountain Range?" The Great Elder shook his head in bewilderment. "I really don't know." After speaking, he hesitated for a moment. Then he said, "However, when I was young, I heard from an old man in the village that there was a group of immortals living on the other side of the Endless Mountain Range. They could easily kill the dark beasts and ghosts. It is said that they used to live in the vast wilderness. The people of the vast wilderness are all their descendants. However, for some unknown reason, there was a sudden change in heaven and earth, and the Endless Mountain Range became denser and denser. In the end, these immortals had no choice but to leave the vast wilderness in search of a place with spiritual energy. Otherwise, the immortals would also be infected by the death aura and lose their lifespan or even die. The immortals finally passed through the Endless Mountain Range and reached the other side. At that time, the immortals would often return. However, as time passed, they returned less and less. The death aura in the vast wilderness also became more and more intense. More than 1,000 years ago, it became a land of death, and the Endless Mountain Range was completely infected by the death aura. The immortals never returned. The first elder recounted everything he knew to Li Daocheng without missing a single word. Listening attentively, Li Daocheng quickly analyzed the truth of the Great Elder's story in his sea of consciousness. After the Great Elder finished speaking, Li Daochong stood in the same place, lost in thought. Blue and gold light flashed in his eyes from time to time. There seemed to be a secret hidden on this dead star that was infected by the death aura. Li Daochong was just puzzled before, but now he felt that things were not so simple. The fiendish python exploded its devil body to open the space transmission channel, trying to take him directly to the deepest part of the Hades. Halfway through, Li Daochong destroyed the fiendish python's devil core and injured it, causing the transmission to stop abruptly. Then Li Daochong and the fiendish python fell into this land of death together. According to the calculation, even if the time was not long, with the strength of the fiendish python, it was enough to transmit him to the Hades, or even to a deeper area. Therefore, it was certain that this dead star was in the Hades. But the strange thing was that since it was in the Hades, why had it never been invaded by the Hades, but only some low-level nether ghosts and nether beasts? These low-level nether beasts, as far as Li Daochong knew, were just tools used by the nether demons to transform the space law. When an area became a land of death, the nether demons could enter here and devour everything. It was reasonable to say that this place had been transformed long ago, but there was no sign of invasion by the Hades. It was just infected by the death aura, and then it was in a state of self-destruction and self-development. Did the Hades not find this place? Li Daochong did not understand. There were nether ghosts here, and the nether demons could easily know the existence of this place. What on earth was hindering the nether demons' footsteps or blinding their eyes? Great immortal, great immortal. The great elder's soft call sounded in Li Daochong's ear, and only then did Li Daochong, who had sunk in a deep thought, come back to his senses. Is something the matter? Li Daochong asked casually. The great elder gathered his courage and asked, Great immortal, this little old man has something he does not understand. If I may be so bold, I would like to ask Great Immortal for advice. Speak, Li Daochong said calmly. Great Immortal, did you not come from the other side of the endless mountains? The great elder's voice trembled slightly. Actually, when Li Daochong asked him this question, the little old man had a bellyful of questions. There were no immortals in the vast wilderness. The great immortal could only have come from the other side of the endless mountains. But why was the great immortal asking him about the endless mountains and the other side? Did he not know about his own hometown? Li Daochong glanced at the great elder, his eyes extremely cold, and a trace of killing intent flashed past. The great elder and Ananu felt a chill run down their spines. With a plop, the two of them knelt down at the same time. Great immortal, please calm down. This little old man deserves to die. How can this little old man ask about the great immortal's matters? The great elder said in a trembling voice in panic. Li Daochong raised his hand, and with a burst of energy, Ananu and the great elder stood up from their kneeling state. If I say that I do not belong to the vast wilderness, the endless mountains, or the other side, would you believe me? Li Daochong's tone was as calm as water. But in the ears of the great elder and Ananu, it was even more intimidating than an angry roar. I believe. How can this little old man not believe the great immortal's words? The great elder's desire to live was extremely strong. After a moment of silence, Li Daochong continuously picked up the medicine bottle and sniffed it. Aren't you curious now where I came from? Li Daochong suddenly asked. The great elder looked at Ananu with a bitter face. This little old man even had the thought of dying. He did not know how to answer Li Daochong's question. Chapter 638. I'm just an ordinary man. I don't dare to ask about your business. All the secrets of Wuxia village are here. Take whatever you like. I only ask that you don't make things difficult for the villagers, pleaded the grand elder. Li Daochong put down the medicine bottle in his hand. As he spoke, he had already sniffed 7 or 8 medicine bottles. He did not find anything special. They were all made of spirit herbs, but they were not as old as the ones in the small ivory bottle. Li Daochong had already found what he was looking for. As for the other things in the wooden house, he was not interested in them at all. Seeing how frightened the great elder was, Li Daochong retracted his aura, and his murderous aura disappeared. Everything has a cause, and if there is a cause, there must be an effect. I am a cultivator, but I'm also not a cultivator. However, since I have come here and met you all, it is also fate. In a few days, I will leave this place. Before I leave, I will give you all some good fortune. As for what happens in the future, it will be up to you all." After Li Daocheng finished speaking, he had already disappeared. The great elder and Ananu looked at each other. They were confused by Li Daocheng's words. In the next few days, Li Daocheng focused on recuperating. Due to the poison, the spiritual energy he absorbed could not restore Li Daocheng's cultivation base. The middle stage of Jindan was the limit that Li Daocheng could reach. His primordial spirit was still in a weakened state. The poison had a great effect on his primordial spirit. Li Daocheng was able to reach the middle stage of Jindan. This was because he was not poisoned too deeply. If Li Daocheng was completely contaminated by the poisonous fog, he would have lost his life. The poison was really powerful. Li Daocheng had always thought that with the protection of the hot-blooded upgrader, the Hades would be ineffective against him. Now, it seemed that this was not the case. This time, even the hot-blooded upgrader was affected. Li Daocheng thought about it and felt that the hot-blooded upgrader's problem was most likely caused by the poison. The blue ball of light in the deepest part of his sea of consciousness had never been so dispirited before. Although the state of his primordial spirit could not be restored, Li Daocheng could still strengthen his body's defense and firmly control the poison. Almost all of the excess spiritual energy was used to resist the poison. After 5 days of recuperation, Li Daocheng tried his best to adjust himself to the best possible state. Then, Li Daocheng checked his belongings. There were 25 pieces of magical equipment, all of which were leftovers from 13 Spectre. As for spirit stones, before coming to the Black Prison, Li Daocheng didn't have many spirit stones on him. He was just waiting to sell the demonic pills and make a fortune. Unfortunately, the world was unpredictable. Not only was the magic pill not sold, it was also swallowed by Li Daocheng. However, in Spirit Cultivator City, Li Daocheng still obtained some spirit stones, but the quantity was very limited. There were only about 500 in total, but they were all high-grade spirit stones. In addition, there were also a number of spirit medicines, all of which were used for healing and cultivation. Li Daocheng actually didn't consume much of his own energy. As long as he killed dark ghosts, he would be able to replenish himself. Under normal circumstances, he didn't need to consume any energy. Therefore, most of the spirit medicines on him were actually prepared for Silver Bottle. Now, he didn't need them. Seeing these spirit medicines, Li Daocheng naturally thought of Silver Bottle. He wondered how that girl was doing now. With Cherry Blossom Gauze protecting her, Li Daocheng didn't have to worry too much. Although he had lost contact with Cherry Blossom Gauze, there was nothing wrong with the Soul Seal. Li Daocheng didn't know what the two women's current situation was, but at least he was sure that Cherry Blossom Gauze was safe and sound. With Cherry Blossom Gauze protecting her, no one in the Black Prison should be able to touch Silver Bottle. Li Daocheng knew that it was useless to worry. He could only think of a way to leave this damned place as soon as possible. If he wanted to leave, he first had to fully recover. Therefore, the most important thing now was to detoxify himself. For the past few days, Li Daocheng had been staying in a wooden house that Ananu had specially prepared for him. This house was actually the village chief's residence. Ananu himself had gone to live elsewhere. Li Daocheng finally walked out of the wooden house after 6 days. It was time to leave. Before he left, Li Daocheng had one more thing to do. He had to give Wuxia village an opportunity. It wasn't that Li Daocheng was being kind. He just felt that he had fallen here for some unknown reason. The people here were in a primitive state. As his compatriots, Li Daocheng didn't really want them to go extinct. Although these people were a little ignorant, they weren't bad people. When Ananu found him, his first reaction was to save them. Because of this, Li Daocheng could leave something for them. Li Daocheng used his divine telekinesis and immediately found Ananu's location. He sent a telepathic message. After a while, Ananu hurried over. His face was filled with fear and trepidation. Facing Li Daocheng, the village chief felt like he was facing a god. He was just a small mortal. He felt like Mount Tai was pressing down on him. He couldn't breathe. Gather all the adult men and women in the village. I want to see how their bone frames are, Li Daocheng said directly. Ananu's face was filled with confusion. What was a bone frame? He didn't understand at all. Of course, he didn't understand. Ananu didn't dare to disobey Li Daocheng's order. He immediately went to gather them. It wasn't difficult to gather 100 people. After more than 10 minutes, there were 9 rows of men and women in the only open space in Wuxia village. There were 5 rows of women and 4 rows of men. There were more women than men. There were 10 people in each row. There were 90 people in total. They were the backbone of Wuxia village. The women's mission was to reproduce and also to defend the village. The men were mainly responsible for hunting and protecting the entire village. Therefore, the men's mortality rate was extremely high. Almost every month, someone would die due to various reasons. Not only did the people here have a shorter pregnancy period, but they also reached adulthood faster than outside. They could reach adulthood at the age of 13. They looked similar to 17 or 18-year-old humans outside. The environment had forced some changes in the people here. Otherwise, they would have died long ago. Li Daocheng glanced at everyone. His divine telekinesis wandered around each person's body. He tried to find people with spirit meridians, even if it was only one spirit meridian. Unfortunately, among the 90 men and women, none of them had a spirit meridian. However, it didn't matter. Even if they had a spirit meridian, it was useless. There was no spirit chi in this godforsaken place. They couldn't cultivate at all. Mental cultivation methods were obviously useless to them. They could only walk the path of a body cultivator. The environment here was very suitable. Their physiques were already very strong. In addition, they walked the line between life and death every day. They might not be able to achieve much by walking the path of a body cultivator, but it could completely stimulate their body's potential. Li Daocheng had many body cultivator techniques with him. There were low-level, middle-level, and high-level ones. These were all plundered when he was on 13 Spectre. There were the Burning Palm Technique, Ice Soul Fist, 27 Deadly Kicks, Reinforced Iron Bones, Demon Vanquishing Staff Technique, and so on. Apart from that, Li Daocheng also had the 9-Split Fist Technique. In the initial stage of a body cultivator, they didn't need spirit chi as support. They relied entirely on their body and strength. Therefore, they could cultivate in places without spirit chi. However, they couldn't achieve much. They still needed spirit chi as support. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to unleash the true power of the technique. After all, the strength of the body was limited. However, he didn't know if they really needed spirit chi. Perhaps in the future, the people here could explore another path on their own. Of course, this was not within Li Daocheng's consideration. He only pointed them in a direction. As for how to proceed, it was up to them. When Li Daocheng handed the technique to Ananu, he simply said a few words. The village chief stared the secret manual in his hand with wide eyes, his hands trembling slightly. Although Ananu had been imprisoned on this land since he was young and knew very little, he still knew that there were some magical things in this world that could make people powerful. At this moment, the secret manual in his hand was a method that could make people become more powerful. All right, that's all there is to know about these techniques. I don't have time to explain them to you one by one. In the next 3 days, I will teach you some basic things. As for the rest, you'll have to figure it out yourself. Also, I have some spirit herbs here. Consider it as an exchange for the bottle of spirit herbs I took from your medicinal warehouse. Li Daocheng stretched out his hand as he spoke, and dozens of palm-sized bottles appeared on the ground. The great elder's mouth was wide open. His turbid eyes were filled with shock. As soon as these spirit herbs appeared, the surroundings were immediately enveloped by a soft aura, making everyone feel much more comfortable. Why are you still standing there? Quickly put these spirit herbs into the medicinal warehouse. If they are placed outside, the spirit chi will quickly dissipate, and the medicinal effects will be reduced. Li Daocheng saw that Ananu and the great elder were standing there in a daze. Ananu suddenly came back to his senses and immediately ordered people to send the spirit herbs into the medicinal warehouse. Li Daochong pondered for a while and said, "Let's go to the medicinal warehouse. I have something else for you." Ananu and the great elders' hearts raced. They looked at each other and saw the ecstasy in each other's eyes. When they arrived at the medicinal warehouse, Li Daochong carefully looked at the spirit array. He took out the spiritual brain to calculate and immediately began to improve the spirit array. The level of this spirit array was too low. Even the entry level of the spirit array masters in the Shanghua Federation's high schools could not compare. Although Li Daochong was not a spirit array master, due to his attainments in spirit order, he had some understanding of spirit arrays. At least compared to alchemy, he was much better. With the help of the spiritual brain, increasing the level of this simple spirit array by 3 or 4 levels was a matter of minutes. The main function of this spirit array was to protect and prevent the spirit qi from dissipating. It created a small enclosed space, which was the range of this wooden house. After Li Daochong's modification, the range of the spirit array had expanded by 5 times, and the protective effect had increased by 30 times. It formed an invisible barrier. However, the stronger the spirit array, the more spirit qi it required. In this dead land without any spirit qi, the only way to obtain spirit qi was through spirit stones. The spirit stones stored in the medicinal warehouse would soon be used up. In the previous spirit array, a normal spirit stone could last for a year. Now, it could not even last for an hour. Normal spirit stones were not even comparable to beginner spirit stones. In the Federation, they were just scraps. The Great Elder looked at the spirit array in the center that was rapidly being consumed, and his excited expression froze. No matter how good an item was, what was the use if it could not be used? This was like an advanced main battle tank that had no fuel. What was the difference between it and scrap metal? Although the Great Elder's heart skipped a beat, he did not dare to show it on his face. Li Daochong walked to the table and waved his hand. A pile of shiny, transparent spirit stones appeared on the table. There were hundreds of them. Ananu, the Great Elder, and a few of the villagers who had followed and all sucked in a breath of cold air. They had never seen this kind of thing before. Although they did not know what it was, when these beautiful stones appeared, the surrounding death qi disappeared. They felt as if they were bathing in the sunlight, and their minds became much clearer. Mobile phone OM. No advertisement XN 81 XNXN XNXNXN. Chapter 639. What Li Daochong took out were all high-grade spirit stones, and he had more than 500 of them on him. Spirit stones were a necessity for cultivators. Not only was it a hard currency, but it was also a source of spiritual energy. Cultivators could also directly use spirit stones for cultivation. However, to Li Daochong, spirit stones were mainly used as money. He did not need spirit stones for cultivation. Of course, if Li Daochong needed it, he could also use spirit stones to replenish his spiritual energy. However, this method was not very cost-effective, so Li Daochong rarely did so. More than 500 high-grade spirit stones were actually a large amount of wealth. It could also provide powerful spiritual energy. However, to Li Daochong, it was not enough. He did not have much use for it. Therefore, he took out 400 spirit stones and gave them to Wuxia village. These spirit stones were enough to use the improved spiritual array for hundreds of years. Although this spiritual array was upgraded a lot compared to the original, it was still a relatively low-level spiritual array. However, it was enough to eat souls here. It would not be easy for underworld beasts like the Minotaur to break this spiritual array. After everything was done, Li Daochong returned to the village chief's wooden house again. He told Ananu to let the smarter people in the village cultivate the ninefold fist technique and burning palm first. He would stay for the last 3 days. Ananu immediately gave the order. The villagers of Wuxia village all knew how powerful Li Daochong was. Everyone did not dare to slack off and immediately began to cultivate the techniques in the secret manual. In the following days, There was an endless stream of people outside the village chief's wooden house. Li Daocheng did not refuse anyone. No matter who asked any question, he would patiently and carefully answer it. Li Daocheng sat cross-legged on the wooden bed without moving. If someone asked a critical question, it would be difficult to explain it clearly in a short time. In order to save time, Li Daocheng would directly instill the points to him through spiritual sense. Directly instilling divine sense was a huge burden for mortals. If they were not careful, their weak divine sense might not be able to withstand it. Unfortunately, there wasn't much time left. Li Daocheng couldn't care too much. He could only give them so much good fortune. As for whether the infusion of spiritual wool would cause harm, he couldn't care less. Of course, Li Daocheng would try his best to reduce the strength of his divine sense to the minimum. Coupled with his spiritual qi, these villagers would not really suffer from any hidden injuries. However, every villager who received the telepathic thoughts would collapse on the ground in exhaustion, as if they had gone through a life-and-death battle and exhausted all their strength. At the start, the villagers were afraid and didn't know what was going on with them. They felt like they were going to die. Li Daocheng let them take the elixirs that he had left behind. The villagers would quickly recover after a good night's sleep. Moreover, they could clearly feel that they had become more powerful. Their strength and skills had greatly improved during this sleep. Of course, Anna would not miss such an opportunity. He was the first Wuxia villager to receive Li Daocheng's teachings. When Anna got out of bed the next day, he felt like he had endless energy. There was a warm current in his dantian that condensed into a mass of qi. This qi was formed by the efficacy of the elixirs that he had taken. Not only that, but Ananu's vision was also much clearer than before. The gray world was no longer so gray. "Father, are you feeling better?" Ayuduo, who was taking care of Ananu, asked worriedly as she looked at her father, who sat up as soon as he woke up. "It's more than a little better. I'm much better," Ananu replied excitedly. He turned over and jumped out of bed. He ran out of the house and looked up at the sky. Ayuduo followed him out with a puzzled expression. "Father, you've slept for a day and a night. You just woke up and your body hasn't adapted yet. Don't you want to lie down for a while?" Ananu didn't seem to hear his daughter. He took a deep breath and looked down at his hands. He had an inexplicable impulse. Then, Ananu bent his knees and jumped. Whoosh! He shot out like a sharp arrow. He jumped more than 5 meters high and more than 20 meters away. The surrounding villagers looked at Ananu, who suddenly flew up with their mouths agape. Ayuduo was dumbfounded. The great elder, who was sitting at the door of the house as usual, suddenly stood up from his chair. His old eyes flashed with shock. Ananu was the strongest warrior of this generation in Wuxia village, but that was only within the normal range. Ananu could jump more than 2 meters high, and 8 to 9 meters was his limit. This time, he seemed to be flying. It was as if he had been reborn and was much stronger. With this ability, he didn't know if he could defeat the horse-faced man, but at least he wouldn't be completely defeated like before. Wuxia village instantly exploded. The villagers who struggled on the line between life and death every day knew what such a huge increase meant. With this ability, their survival ability would be greatly enhanced. It also meant that they could obtain more food. The doubts in everyone's hearts instantly vanished. Not long after Ananu woke up, the other villagers also woke up. Like Ananu, they had also become stronger. The increase in physique was visible to the naked eye, but in fact they were far stronger than they had imagined. In terms of skills, it couldn't be seen without fighting. Li Daocheng directly let them cultivate in the spiritual world. It was just like how Li Daocheng cultivated his technique through the hot-blooded upgrader. Of course, Li Daocheng couldn't do it as thoroughly as the hot-blooded upgrader. He only let the villagers who had been instilled with spiritual force learn the first layer of the 9-split fist technique. No matter how much he instilled, the villagers' spiritual force wouldn't be able to withstand it, and they would die on the spot. Ananu couldn't wait to bring the few villagers who had woken up out to hunt. In just half a day, they brought back 2 load-bearing beasts. The whole hunting process was easier than expected. The originally strong, load-bearing beasts had become little lambs. As soon as Ananu returned, the first thing he did was ask Ayuduo to go to Li Daochong immediately. There was only one day left before the great immortal left. Ananu didn't want his daughter to miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. However, when Ayuduo was instilled with Li Daochong's spiritual force, Li Daochong was surprised to find that there was a dark soul in the girl's body that hadn't awakened. Possession? Li Daochong looked serious and took back his spiritual force in time. Once the spiritual force was instilled, Ayodwa's spiritual force would be extremely weak, and the dark soul was very likely to take the opportunity to devour Ayodwa's soul. This dark soul was very strange, and Li Daochong had never seen it before. And this dark soul had just sneaked into Ayodwa's body. Li Daochong carefully probed, and then his eyes flashed with blue-golden brilliance, and his body flashed with several electric lights. It turned out to be the remnant soul of the fiendish python. Li Daochong sneered in his heart. No wonder when he crushed the fiendish python's magic core, he didn't get as much spiritual chi as he thought. It turned out that he hadn't really been killed. The devil General Ming Mo was not so easy to completely eliminate. This dark soul was very well hidden. If Li Daochong hadn't instilled his spiritual force into Ayuduo, he wouldn't have found its existence at all. Li Daochong's spiritual force slowly wrapped the dark soul, slowly gathered it, and then suddenly launched a spiritual force attack. Roar! A terrible roar came from Ayodwa's sea of consciousness. The dark soul rolled violently and tried to break out of Li Daochong's spiritual force encirclement, but it was too late. Human cultivator, I'm going to kill you. The fiendish python's remnant soul roared, but stopped abruptly. You won't have the chance, Li Daochong said coldly. His spiritual force swallowed the fiendish python's remnant soul like a huge mouth, and a thunder force shot directly at the remnant soul's heart. No, no. Human cultivator, if you kill me, you will never be able to get rid of the poison in your body, the fiendish python's remnant soul said in a trembling voice in fear. Li Daochong's spiritual force suddenly paused, and he said coldly, Tell me, what poison is it? If you let me possess this girl, I will tell you. Although the fiendish python's voice was trembling, its words were obviously threatening. Humph, I hate threats the most. You'd better die, Li Daochong said angrily. Don't, great immortal. The fiendish python still wanted to say something. But Li Daochong didn't give it another chance, and the thunder force shot out instantly. The fiendish python's remnant soul was completely swallowed before it could even cry out. Mobile phone M. OM. No ads XN 81 XN. Chapter 640. After erasing the remnant soul of the fiendish python, the prompt sounded, but it was still in an intermittent and vague state. Li Daochong had been accustomed to this state of the hot-blooded upgrader. A huge amount of spiritual chi was instantly transformed, which was almost the same as the amount of spiritual chi when Li Daochong crushed the fiendish python's magic core. However, even with so much spiritual chi, Li Daochong still couldn't recover at all. Li Daochong was already prepared. He immediately wrapped this huge amount of spiritual chi with the thunder force and stored it in his inner world in case of an emergency. This was equivalent to giving Li Daochong a panacea that could revive him several times when he was exhausted. At the same time, it could also provide Li Daochong with a source of spiritual chi to heal himself when needed. Although it couldn't help Li Daochong recover his cultivation, it could still play a big role. After doing all this, Li Daochong immediately transferred a little spiritual chi to Ayuduo to help her recover her body that had been eroded by the remnant soul these days. Not long after, Ayuduo regained consciousness, and then a divine thought hit her. Ayuduo only felt numb all over, and her consciousness entered another world where she had spent several years practicing the ninefold fist technique day and night. When she woke up, she collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath, and her whole body was drenched in sweat. Take her down and have a good rest. Li Daochong slowly opened his eyes and said. Ananu immediately helped the Yuduo out of the wooden house. Li Daochong gave the Yuduo a big gift. The remnant soul of the fiendish python lurked in her body and had been transforming a Yodwa's physique these days. The reason for this was to get a better carrier when it took over a body. A Yuduo profited from the disaster, and with the nourishment of Li Daochong's spiritual qi, her divine thought became extremely powerful. At least, it was much stronger than other people in Wuxia village, and was comparable to an ordinary qi-gathering cultivator. In this way, Li Daochong could directly instill all the 9 fist techniques of the ninefold fist technique into her. When Ayuduo woke up the next day, her entire body was covered in a thick layer of filth, and the smell was extremely unpleasant. Ayuduo hurriedly jumped into the wooden tub to wash her body. When she came out of the wooden tub, she was stunned. Was this still him? Ayuduo looked at her naked body in the only crystal mirror in the room. She was completely stunned. Since when did her skin become so fair and radiant? It was as smooth as jade. Not only that, but Ayodwa's body had also undergone some changes. She was half a head taller than before, with a full bosom and perky buttocks, and a pair of round and firm thighs that were long and straight. Standing in a house, Ayuduo could actually sense the movements of the entire village. It was as if she was seeing it with her own eyes. Pop, pop. Ayodwa's divine sense moved, and a ball of blue sparks appeared in her palm. Heavens! Ayuduo exclaimed. She realized that she had been completely reborn. After putting on her clothes, Ayuduo impatiently rushed out of the house. Ayuduo felt the wind blow past her ears. Her vision blurred, and she was already more than 100 meters away. She almost crashed into the withered wooden wall. If she had really crashed into it, Ayuduo had a strange feeling that nothing would have happened to her. The withered wooden wall would have collapsed in an instant. Ayuduo did not have time to think carefully. She turned and ran toward the village chief's wooden house. She only wanted to see the great immortal. When she arrived at the village chief's wooden house, Ayuduo saw her father standing outside the door and saying something to a few villagers. Ayuduo felt that something was amiss. She walked to the front of the wooden house. The door was open, and there was no sign of the great immortal inside. Father, where is the great immortal? Ayuduo had an ominous premonition. Ananu glanced at his daughter and did not immediately answer. Instead, he continued to tell the villagers what had happened. Only when the villagers left did Ananu turn around and say to Ayuduo, "The great immortal left this morning." An extremely disappointed expression immediately appeared on Ayodwa's pretty face. She muttered, "He didn't even give me a chance to call him master?" Ayuduo raised her small face and looked in a certain direction. She had spiritual force. Although it was nothing compared to a cultivator's, her perception was more than 10,000 times stronger than before. Her intuition told her that the great immortal was in this direction. However, he was very far away, so far that she could not reach him. Suddenly, Ayodwa's face stiffened. "Father, did the great immortal say where he was going when he left?" Ananu looked at Ayuduo and was silent for a while before saying, "The endless mountains." "What? The endless mountains?" Ayuduo cried out. While Ayuduo was talking to her father, Li Daochong appeared at the entrance of the endless mountains. He was dressed in green and carried a rusty saber on his back. A mighty ancient ape stood behind Li Daochong to the left. The man and ape stared at the endless mountain range in front of them. "Little thing, what do you think is inside?" Li Daochong asked jokingly. "Roar." The Shabi knew what Li Daochong was talking about. Its answer was very simple. It faced the mountain range and roared. It meant that it did not care what was inside. As long as it dared to provoke them, they would eat it. Li Daochong smiled and patted the Shabi's shoulder. "I know you are powerful. Let's go. Let's meet them." With that, Li Daochong shot out. The Shabi was stunned for a moment and immediately chased after him. Flying in the land of death consumed too much energy. Although it was fast, it could not be maintained for too long. Li Daochong was only at the mid-stage of Jindan and could not fly too fast. It was more practical and effective to run and jump. The energy consumption of running was very limited. He would not feel too tired even if he ran thousands of miles a day. The mountain road was rugged, which reduced Li Daocheng's speed to a certain extent. Just like that, the man and ape ran crazily in the mountain range. Along the way, there were rocky hills, black cliffs, and black forests. Terrifying cries and howls constantly came from all directions. However, these sounds were clearly from far away. It was only because of the special geographical environment of the mountain range that the sounds could travel very far. Li Daocheng did not stop for a moment. He had to pass through the endless mountain range as soon as possible and reach the other side. After finding the spiritual herb that could cure the poison in his body, Li Daocheng did not want to stay in this place any longer. He had to leave the Hades as soon as possible and return to the spirit realm's human realm. The Hades was too unsafe for Li Daocheng, even if the underworld demons had not discovered this place yet. This time, the Black Prison was defeated in the Hades. The cherry blossom gauze was not caught, and the plan to control the Black Prison was completely ruined. In addition, the underworld demons sent to the Black Prison were all dead. With such a big commotion, it was impossible for the Hades not to react at all. Li Daocheng estimated that the prince of the netherworld should have already known his appearance. The fiendish python fell here with him. If there was any secret connection, the netherworld clan would find this place sooner or later. Li Daocheng's current situation was terrible. As long as a low-level witch ghost was sent over, he could be killed. Therefore, it was imperative to cure the poison in his body and restore his strength. For 5 days, Li Daocheng did not stop for a moment, except for a little breath every 5 hours. He did not sleep, eat, or drink. When the spiritual qi was consumed, he used the stored spiritual qi to replenish it. At first, Shabi was able to do it with ease, but after a long time, it was a little weak. In 5 days, according to Li Daocheng's estimation, he had run at least tens of thousands of miles. The great wilderness was in the south of the endless mountain range, and the other side was in the north. Li Daocheng used his spiritual thoughts to perceive the magnetic field of the planet and kept running in one direction. It was strange that Li Daocheng did not encounter a single underworld beast or underworld ghost along the way. The road was so quiet that it was unreal. All the legends about the endless mountain range in the great wilderness were full of blood and horror. Li Daocheng was fully prepared, but after coming in, 5 days had passed, and he did not encounter anything. In fact, Li Daocheng's spiritual thoughts had perceived the existence of powerful underworld ghosts several times. But when he and Shabi moved at high speed, the huge death aura would quickly leave. Li Daocheng glanced at Shabi while running. Was it the evil spirit on this guy that made those evil ghosts flinch? This was the only plausible explanation for the current situation. The terrain of the endless mountain range was extremely regular. It was an endless mountain range. There were no particularly prominent peaks or low valleys. All the mountains were about the same height. There were cliffs, black stones, and black rocks everywhere. The ground was covered with all kinds of black shrubs, dead zombie grass, and other underworld vegetation. The forest was composed of black skeleton trees, locust tree, and some extremely tall black cypresses. 15 days later, on a certain night, Li Daocheng and Shabi lit a fire under a black cypress. It was very boring to keep running. They stopped not because they were tired, but because they needed a little adjustment. Li Daocheng also needed a certain amount of time to meditate and adjust his breathing. Without killing monsters, Li Daocheng would consolidate his cultivation at all times. Now that the poison was left in his body, he had to conduct an internal inspection every once in a while and consolidate his defenses. Every time Li Daocheng adjusted his breathing, Shabi would lie on the side and sleep. Eating and sleeping were Shabi's greatest pursuits. But along the way, it did not eat or drink. Only sleep could comfort Shabi's empty stomach. Snore, snore. Shabi's snoring was not loud, but it was not soft either. Accompanied by such sounds, Li Daocheng sat cross-legged on the side with his eyes closed. Suddenly, his spiritual thoughts moved. Li Daocheng suddenly opened his eyes. Almost at the same time, Shabi's pair of monkey eyes opened. One man and one ape looked at each other and then looked in the same direction at the same time. Listening carefully, an extremely soft sound of metal colliding came from a distance. Someone was fighting. But why were there people fighting here? Li Daochong was puzzled. He had been running non-stop since he entered the Endless Mountains. Half a month had passed. His current location was very, very far away from the vast wilderness. It was impossible for there to be people here. Could it be that the underworld beasts and underworld ghosts were fighting for territory? With this question in mind, Li Daochong's figure flashed and disappeared. The Shabi followed closely behind. Following the sound, Li Daochong sped all the way, completely restraining his aura. Shabi's body was also wrapped in Li Daochong's spiritual thoughts, covering its baleful aura. A few minutes later, a canyon appeared in front of him. The sound of fighting came from there. Li Daochong slowed down. Shabi did not notice and almost fell on its face. It happened to bump into Li Daochong, so it did not embarrass itself. Li Daochong turned around and slapped the back of Shabi's head. He transmitted his voice, "Be careful." Shabi scratched its head with an innocent expression. It whimpered in its throat, indicating that it did not do it on purpose. Li Daochong jumped a few times and used a black boulder as cover. He stood behind it and looked into the canyon. He saw that beside a black stream in the center of the valley, 3 lizard men covered in scales were fighting a man in white with a face as pale as wax paper and wearing a tall hat. When he saw the man with the tall hat, Li Daochong's hair stood on end for no reason. Why did this person look so much like white impermanence? Li Daochong had seen many ghosts after awakening, but he had never felt so creeped out like this. But when he saw this person, Li Daochong felt a chill run down his spine. It was not that Li Daochong was afraid, but that this person's appearance was too similar to the white impermanence from his previous world. He was dressed in white and wore a tall white hat. He was more than a meter tall, and the weapon in his hand was a metal chain. Li Daochong remembered that thing was called the Soul Hooking Lock. Chapter 641. When Li Daochong saw white impermanence's appearance, he was truly shocked. Of course, Li Daochong wasn't afraid. He was just surprised by this sudden coincidence. However, Li Daochong quickly calmed down. White impermanence's death aura wasn't that strong. The 3 lizard men weren't humans or fiends. They also emitted death aura. White impermanence's strength was about the same as a baleful ghost. In this land, she could be considered a big shot. As long as she wasn't a witch ghost, she was easy to deal with. Li Daochong and Shabi's eyes flashed with greed. They were both hungry. Li Daochong wasn't in a hurry to act. He spread out his divine sense to see if there were any ambushes. When he did, Li Daochong sucked in a breath of cold air. Directly in front of him, more than 20 kilometers away, there was a death force field hidden in the forest. This death force field wasn't a terrifying Hades creature. Instead, it was created by tens of thousands of Hades creatures gathered together. Not only that, but their individual strength was also very strong. They had reached the level of high-level green ghosts. Some were even baleful ghosts. With Li Daochong's current strength, he wasn't confident in winning against so many undead creatures. If he wasn't careful, it was possible for him to fail miserably. But why were these ghosts gathered together? Li Daochong was confused. Li Daochong also didn't understand why the lizard men and white impermanence were fighting. From what Li Daochong knew, dark ghosts rarely fought against each other. In the dark ghost world, the hierarchy was very strict. When a low-level dark ghost faced a high-level dark ghost, it was like a mouse seeing a cat. As long as a high-level dark ghost wanted to, it could instantly devour a low-level dark ghost and merge them into its body. In the canyon, the 3 lizard men were clearly weaker than white impermanence. However, they didn't fear white impermanence at all. The 3 of them worked together to fight white impermanence. This kind of rule violated the Hades' rules. It was more like the rules of the human domain. Just as Li Daochong was pondering, a massive death force field appeared in another direction. This death force field was not as majestic as the previous one, but it was sharper. It was a death force field that belonged to a single undead creature. Li Daocheng's pupils shrank. An underworld ghost at the Wu ghost level, and not a low-level one at that. Li Daocheng wouldn't be able to defeat Wu Gui if he didn't go all out. Li Daocheng, who originally wanted to appear and capture the 3 lizard men and white impermanence, was now standing behind the big black rock. His expression flickered, and he was filled with questions, not daring to act rashly. At this time, the Shabi could not even feel its breathing. The little fellow was completely quiet. As a member of the ancient mythological beasts, even if it was still in its infancy, it still had the most basic awareness. On one side was the underworld ghost army, and on the other was the witch ghost. 2 death force fields rapidly converged from afar. Li Daocheng slowly crouched down and crawled behind the black rock. The Shabi's body quickly shrank and soon returned to its original state. It crouched down beside Li Daocheng. White impermanence, under the siege of the 3 lizard men, was not at a disadvantage. Instead, it became more and more courageous. The 3 lizard men were clearly not as strong as they wanted to be, but they were still bitterly holding on, doing their best to delay white impermanence. As the 2 death force fields drew closer and closer, white impermanence also became anxious. Damn lizardmen, if you block the way again, I'll hook you into the reincarnation road. White impermanence opened its mouth as it spoke, and a long blood-red tongue shot out like lightning. Holy shit, Li Daocheng cursed in his heart. Even the tongue was the same and could extend. When Li Daocheng heard the words reincarnation road, he was once again shocked. There really was a reincarnation road in this world? From Li Daocheng's point of view, the Hades were just a different race. It was completely different from his previous world's understanding. Li Daocheng had never thought of the Hades as something like hell. To put it bluntly, the Hades were a spirit race, a race that used souls as their life structure. Humans were a race that used their physical bodies as their foundation. From the moment the Hades were born, it was simply a process of refining a physical body. Their final goal was to become a human. Humans were the exact opposite. At the end of their cultivation, it was a process of condensing a powerful source spirit. They could leave their physical bodies and exist outside of the world. Looking at it like this, the Hades and humans were a pair of contradictory bodies. When they were born, they were both in the final state that the other wanted. But now Li Daocheng was a little confused. Could it be that his previous understanding was wrong? That the Hades were not a different race, but an existence like hell? Otherwise, how could there be a reincarnation road? If it was like this, wouldn't there be a heavenly court? Li Daocheng suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. This place was filled with things that Li Daocheng could not understand. It made him shiver. What kind of place was this? The questions in Li Daocheng's heart turned into a large question mark that flashed above his head. Humph! White Witch, don't think that you can be unrestrained just because you're from the Ghost Palace. Those prey were first discovered by our Black Wind Valley. One of the lizard men retorted. When Li Daocheng heard this, the shock in his eyes eased a little. So she was called the White Witch. If she was really called White Impermanence, that would be interesting. Just because you say you found them first, does that mean you found them first? All the resources in the Endless Mountain Range have always belonged to the strong. Your Black Wind Valley is just a group of monsters that are neither human nor ghost. There is no place for you in the Blackwood 3 realms. Do you think that you can dominate the Endless Mountain Range by relying on a witch ghost? You're dreaming. The White Witch said with disdain. When the 3 lizard men heard the White Witch call them monsters that are neither human nor ghost, they were so angry that their lungs were about to explode. The 3 of them attacked even more fiercely, but the soul-hooking chain in the White Witch's hand seemed to have a life of its own. It shuttled back and forth unpredictably. The 3 lizard men were hit repeatedly. Wherever the soul-hooking chain hit, green smoke would rise and the scales on their bodies would shatter. Just as the 3 lizard men were about to collapse, a violent wind suddenly blew in the valley. A black cloud rolled out from the depths of the forest, bringing with it an incomparably terrifying aura of death. The White Witch's expression changed greatly. She wielded the soul-hooking chain in her hand and tried to kill the 3 lizard men. However, just as she was about to attack, a black light shot out from the black cloud. The White Witch was shocked. She quickly retracted the soul-hooking chain, and the chain quickly gathered to form a shield. Bang! The black light hit the chain shield. The White Witch was sent flying like a cannonball. The black cloud roared and rolled out from the forest. It quickly shrank and turned into a black-robed man. When the 3 lizard men saw the man, they ignored their injuries and immediately went forward to salute him. "Greetings, master," the 3 of them said at the same time. "No need to be so polite. Have you found the prey?" The black-robed man asked in a deep voice. "Master, the prey is in the cave. We were going to capture it, but we were stopped by the White Witch, so—" One of the lizard men carefully replied, "You are no match for the White Witch. It's not your fault. Now go and capture the prey. Leave the rest to me." The black-robed man interrupted the lizard men. "Yes, master," the 3 lizard men said in unison. After that, the 3 of them quickly ran in the direction of the cliff where Li Daochong was. The White Witch was sent flying by the black light. It seemed to be very heavy, but it wasn't injured. When it saw the 3 lizard men running to the cliff, it immediately chased after them. However, just as the White Witch moved, a black shadow flashed and the black-robed man appeared in front of her. The White Witch's eyes flashed. Without thinking, she quickly retreated and distanced herself from the black-robed man. However, the black-robed man wouldn't let her go. With a flick of his sleeve, a withered hand stretched out from inside. The hand seemed to be able to extend infinitely. The White Witch retreated more than 10 meters, but it was still caught by the withered hand. The White Witch was shocked. The soul-hooking chain moved like lightning and coiled around the withered hand that was holding her neck. At that moment, the White Witch felt that the death energy in her body was being sucked away at an alarming speed. In the distance, Li Daochong narrowed his eyes when he saw the black-robed man's withered hand. He immediately recognized that the black-robed man was a soul catcher. Moreover, he was a relatively powerful soul catcher, the king of Kukui. Li Daochong had once killed the complete king of Kukui on that nameless dead star. Li Daochong condensed the Jindan there. The passage to that dead star was hundreds of meters below the Heavenly Palace Clubhouse. Li Daochong could kill the complete king of Kukui when he was in the Foundation establishment stage. Although he was poisoned now and could only maintain his cultivation at the middle stage of Jindan, it was more than enough to kill the complete king of Kukui. Mobile phone, M-O-N-O advertisement, 81 Zhongsong, song. Chapter 642. Li Daochong wasn't interested in the battle between the 2 parties in the canyon, nor did he want to interfere. However, Li Daochong had a big mystery in his heart. He was extremely curious about it and wanted to know where this damned place was. Li Daochong focused on the movements in the canyon, not wanting to miss a single detail. The White Witch wasn't a match for the king of Kukui. At this moment, she was being suppressed, and her strength and death aura were rapidly draining away. The king of Kukui was much higher in level than the White Witch, so the former could devour the latter. The White Witch was shocked. She struggled with all her might, but it was useless. She was about to be devoured by the king of Kukui. At this moment, ghostly wails and howls could be heard from the forest. Countless grayish-white souls flew out from within. In the blink of an eye, the entire canyon was filled with ghosts and demons. The king of Kukui's expression froze. Death aura surged out of his body as he tried to use the pressure of a high-level dark ghost to suppress these ghosts. However, no matter how much death aura the king of Kukui released, the ghosts remained unmoved. One by one, they drilled into the White Witch's body. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of ghosts drilled into the White Witch's body and disappeared. The White Witch's expression, which had been shocked just a moment ago, became sinister as a cold smile appeared on her lips. Black chi emerged from the White Witch's body. The ghosts were still rushing into her body and fusing with her. The White Witch's body grew slightly, and at the same time, her pale face turned ashen. Her flesh, which wasn't very solid, became more and more corporeal until it finally became solid. However, the ghosts didn't stop. They were still drilling into the White Witch's body. Li Daochong was moved when he saw this. There was actually such a thing. These low-level dark ghosts were actually willing to fuse with the White Witch's body. Just what kind of secret technique was it that made these dark ghosts help the White Witch without fear of death? In the time it took to take 10 breaths, the ghosts that filled the sky all rushed into the White Witch's body. The king of Kukui's terrifying withered hand that was grabbing the White Witch's neck trembled slightly. The king of Kukui actually retreated a little. He was actually unable to continue devouring the White Witch. Huh! The White Witch opened her mouth and breathed out a mouthful of black smoke. A long blood-red tongue shot out from his mouth. The king of Kukui's wrinkled and withered face revealed a look of shock. Bang! The long tongue hit the king of Kukui's chest. The king of Kukui was sent flying like a cannonball, crashing into the mountain wall behind him. Boom! The king of Kukui's body sank deep into the mountain wall, forming a crater more than 10 meters in diameter. King of Kukui, do you think that a mere soul catcher is invincible in the Skyen mountain range? The White Witch said coldly. Whoosh! The king of Kukui flashed out from the crater in the mountain wall. The heavy impact didn't cause him any harm. The king of Kukui didn't say a word. He shot straight at the White Witch. The White Witch threw the soul-hooking chain in its hand and wrapped it around the king of Kukui. The soul-hooking chain quickly contracted like a twisting python. The soul-hooking chain's strength was extremely fast, and it contracted completely in an instant. A sneer appeared on the White Witch's hideous face, but it froze in the next second. The soul-hooking chain wrapped around a black robe, and the king of Kukui disappeared. The White Witch felt a chill behind its back. It instantly turned around and struck out with its palm. A mummy without bandages appeared behind it. Boom! The two palms collided. The aura of death surged, and a shockwave instantly spread out. At this moment, the 3 lizardmen had already reached the bottom of the cliff. They were just about to climb up the cliff when the shockwave whistled over. There was a buzzing sound. The 3 lizardmen were sent flying and crashed heavily into the cliff. One of the lizardmen's head was smashed into mush. Although the other 2 lizardmen weren't as miserable, they were also heavily injured and couldn't get up for a while. There was a cave above the cliff. Under the attack of the shockwave, rocks rolled down and blocked half of the cave. The inside of the cave was also shaken to the point that rocks flew everywhere. Inside, for human cultivators with ragged clothes and dusty faces were shocked. For human cultivators, 2 men and 2 women. One of them, a man and a woman, even in this state, couldn't hide their stunning appearances. The man had sword-like eyebrows, big eyes, a tall nose, and pointed ears. His face was angular and slightly feminine. He was more beautiful than most pretty women. There was no need to talk about the woman. Lu Mei had phoenix eyes, a fine nose, red lips, and smooth skin. She was as beautiful as a painting. The man and woman looked no different from humans, but if one looked closely, they would notice some slight differences. Their pupils were blue, and their hair was white. These characteristics were enough to show that they weren't humans. At least, they weren't pure humans. They had the bloodline of demons. The other man and woman were undoubtedly humans. At this moment, the 4 of them had ugly expressions. The shockwave just now was more than 10 kilometers away from them, but it still caused them effective damage. The 4 of them felt their insides churning. The female human cultivator almost fainted. But if Li Daochong saw this female human cultivator, he would definitely be shocked. Li Daochong would never have thought that he would meet someone familiar in this place that he didn't understand at all. This familiar person, if Li Daochong didn't see her in person, he would have already forgotten her. Sister Lu, are you okay? Wang Dongming saw that Lu Mei's situation wasn't right and asked nervously. I'm fine. Lu Mei took out a spirit medicine and swallowed it. On the other side, the demon man and woman situation was much better, but the worry in their eyes was very strong. Boom! Another rumbling sound was heard, followed by another shock wave. The cave seemed to be on the verge of collapse. It shook violently. Gravel constantly fell from the cave walls. At the same time, cracks appeared on the walls. King Luo foamed, "We can't stay here any longer. It's going to collapse." The demon woman bit her lower lip and said. The demon man's expression was dignified. He clutched his chest with one hand. He seemed to be enduring the pain. "Chia, let's wait a little longer." King Luo Feng forced himself to not show the pain. A day ago, the four of them came to this area in order to find traces of the fox immortal. As a result, they encountered more than 10 lizard men who were out hunting. The two sides fought as soon as they met. At that time, the 8 of them fought fiercely with the lizard men. In the end, they wiped out all the lizard men. At the same time, they paid the price of 4 human cultivators. Only the 4 of them were left. Moreover, they all suffered different degrees of internal injuries. But before they could escape, they were discovered by the other lizard men. The 4 of them were unable to continue fighting and had no choice but to escape. But with their injuries, they couldn't run fast. In the process of escaping, their injuries worsened. They had no choice but to find a place to hide temporarily. Unfortunately, they were discovered in less than half a day. The lizard men chased them all the way here. Just as the 4 of them were about to fight with their lives, the white witch intercepted the lizard men. The two sides fought fiercely over the food. Naturally, the food was the 4 of them. At this moment, outside the cave, the white witch and the king of Kukui were fighting fiercely. The 2 nether ghosts were evenly matched. The white witch was a great expert of the ghost palace in the endless mountain range. The king of Kukui was a nether ghost that had evolved over a long period of time. After entering Black Wind Valley, he was worshipped by a group of nether demon lizard men. The lizard men were originally demons, but because they lived in a place filled with death chi for a long time, they had been completely corroded by the death chi. They lost their original soul and became nether demons. They lived by eating human souls. As soon as the 3 lizard men fell, dozens of lizard men rushed out of the mountain forest. They ran directly in the direction of the cave. On the other side of the mountain forest, hundreds of specters also flew out. Along the way, not all of the specters entered the white witch's body. Among them, the malicious ghosts were all hidden in the mountain forest. When they saw the lizard men rush out, they also rushed out. The 4 people in the cave could clearly see the lizard men and malicious ghosts through a clairvoyance magic treasure. Boom! Another shockwave came. The walls of the cave couldn't withstand it anymore. Ka ka ka! Frightening cracking sounds could be heard. King Luo Feng, Qi, Lu Mei, and Wang Dongming. Among the 4 people, King Luo Feng was the strongest, but he was only in the middle stage of the Foundation Establishment realm. The other 3 were in the early stage of the Foundation Establishment realm. If the cave really collapsed, it would be no different from the way to Mount Tai. With their strength, it was impossible for them to resist the weight of a mountain. "Run!" Lord Luo Feng cried out in alarm and threw out a metal rod. The metal rod held up the collapsed walls of the cave. The 4 people had no choice but to escape from the cave. As soon as they came out of the cave, they saw that below, dozens of lizard men had already climbed up the cliff. 1 kilometer away, hundreds of malicious ghosts were whistling towards them. The 4 people gritted their teeth and flew towards the top of the mountain. They didn't care about their injuries and flew with all their strength. At this time, Li Daocheng, who was standing behind the huge black rock at the top of the mountain, had an even more puzzled expression on his face. When the figure of the female cultivator came into view, Li Daocheng was really a bit confused. "Lu Mei, why is she here? Or is it just a resemblance?" Seeing the 4 people flying towards him, Li Daocheng stood behind the huge black rock without moving. Unless Li Daocheng deliberately gave himself away, no one in the entire valley could discover his existence. Although the 4 people used a flying technique, their speed was not very fast. In Li Daocheng's eyes, they were not much faster than a crawling tortoise. They were not as fast as those lizard men who climbed up the cliff with their bare hands. These lizard men were like monkeys, quickly jumping up from below. Not to mention the hundreds of malicious ghosts. Their ghostly figures flew from the distance in the blink of an eye. Next to the huge black rock that Li Daochong was hiding in was an open space on the cliff. As soon as Lu Mei and the others arrived here, they were intercepted by a few lizard men who had jumped up first. Chapter 643. Li Daochong's divine sense locked onto Lu Mei. After confirming it more than 10 times, the doubt on his face became even stronger. This woman really was Lu Mei. When Li Daochong had just woken up, this woman would often appear in front of him. She was the most active person among those who mocked and ridiculed him. Li Daochong's impression of Lu Mei had never been very good. If she wasn't Ouyang Qian's friend, he would have taught her a lesson long ago. However, this woman appeared less and less until she completely disappeared from Li Daochong's sight. However, apart from being snobbish, Lu Mei didn't do anything to Li Daochong. Therefore, as time passed, Li Daochong had long forgotten about this person. If he hadn't seen Lu Mei today, Li Daochong wouldn't have thought of this person at all. But why would Lu Mei appear here? Li Daochong originally thought that this damned place was another spatial zone that had fallen into space-time turbulence. He had only fallen into this place by accident. Lu Mei's appearance immediately made Li Daochong abandon this conjecture. Li Daochong looked at Lu Mei's flickering eyes and felt a ripple in his heart. Could it be that it wasn't difficult to leave this place? While Li Daochong was thinking, hundreds of malicious ghosts and dozens of lizard men rushed toward Lu Mei and the others. Although the 4 of them were injured to varying degrees, they still had a lot of treasures on them. Rays of light constantly shot out from their hands. Talismans? Li Daochong narrowed his eyes slightly. These talismans weren't low-level either. They were at least level 5 or 6. There were ice talismans, fire talismans, thunder talismans, light talismans, and wind talismans. When Li Daochong came to this world, what he was really good at was making talismans. Therefore, he knew very well how precious talismans were. Although this thing could be mass-produced, it was not easy to make a spiritual talisman in this godforsaken place that did not even have spiritual energy. However, Lu Mei and the other 3 could use talismans so freely. Judging from their behavior, they didn't care about the consumption of talismans at all. They even shot out 2 at the same time. It seemed like everyone had a lot of them. Although there were a lot of malicious ghosts and lizard men, they couldn't get close to Lu Mei and the others under the concentrated attack of the talismans. However, the level 6 talismans didn't do much damage to the malicious ghosts and lizard men, so they couldn't kill them instantly. A single talisman was not enough to kill them unless it hit their vitals. However, since the lizard men were gathered at the edge of the cliff, there was a high probability that they would fall off the cliff. Therefore, the lizardmen's casualties were much higher than the ghouls. Many of the lizard men who had yet to climb up did not dare to rashly climb to the top. They had no choice but to crawl on the cliff. Although the malicious ghosts' whereabouts were unpredictable, the Thunder Talisman dealt additional damage to them, so the casualties were not small. The talismans shot out from the 4 people's hands like machine guns. Rays of light spread over the cliff like bursting fireworks. On the other side, in the canyon, the battle between the king of Kukui and the White, which continued to escalate. At the center of the canyon, the aura of death soared into the sky. The 2 great ghosts didn't give way to each other. They used all their killing moves and fought until the sky turned dark. For a moment, the situation was very advantageous for Lu Mei and the others. As long as the group of malicious ghosts was destroyed, they would have a great chance of escaping. However, just as the 4 of them saw hope, a black cloud rolled over in the sky. A wave of aura of death that was even more terrifying than the combined aura of the king of Kukui and the White, which swept over from the horizon. To be precise, this aura had already surpassed the category of ordinary aura of death. It was infinitely close to witchcraft aura. The soul capture Ghost King? Li Daochong looked at the black cloud. This was going to be lively. The ghosts in the Skyen Mountains were indeed much more powerful than those in the wasteland. But why were these ghosts holed up in the Skyen Mountains and not going out? Li Daochong had far too many questions in his mind that needed answers. The king of Kukui and the White Witch, who were fiercely fighting each other, were startled and came to a tacit halt. In the face of the sudden appearance of the soul-devouring Ghost King, even the two nether ghosts, who were burning with rage, had no choice but to temporarily restrain their anger. Whoosh! With a gust of wind, the black cloud instantly gathered together. A tall, gray-faced man with a thick, baleful aura appeared in the air. The gray-faced man was covered from head to toe in a cloak, revealing only his legs, hands, neck, and head. The rest of his body was hidden under the cloak. The soul-devouring Ghost King was the strongest existence among the soul-devouring ghosts. He was only a step away from becoming a witchcraft ghost. At the soul-devouring ghost level, he possessed a simplified physical body, a half-soul, half-flesh state. In front of the lizard men and the many nether ghosts, the lofty king of Kukui and the White Witch stood high and mighty. The moment the gray-faced man appeared, the two ghosts revealed a look of fear. You two really don't know what's good for you. I don't care what grudges you have between you two. From now on, let it go. Lord Witchcraft Ghost has ordered that we must find that fox demon within 3 days. If we can't find it, everyone from the Ghost Manor and Black Wind sect will be buried with it. A hint of viciousness flashed through the soul-devouring Ghost King's eyes. The king of Kukui and the White Witch's faces twitched involuntarily. They looked extremely terrified. They already couldn't hold on against the soul-devouring Ghost King, let alone Lord Witchcraft Ghost. However, the White Witch was very unconvinced in her heart, but she didn't dare to show it on her face. Unlike Black Wind Valley, the Ghost Manor was still a very powerful force in the Skyen Mountain Range. The Ghost Manor's magistrate was a witchcraft, ghost-level existence. He wasn't any weaker than this guy who had suddenly appeared. However, the magistrate wasn't here. Distant water couldn't quench a present thirst. What are you waiting for? Capture those 4 human cultivators first. They might know the whereabouts of the demon fox. The soul-devouring Ghost King said in a commanding tone. The king of Kukui didn't even think about it. He turned around and shot toward the cliff like lightning. The White Witch wasn't slow either. She followed closely behind. In just a few breaths' time, the king of Kukui and the White Witch had already appeared on top of the cliff. At this moment, Lu Mei and the others were still shooting out spirit talismans. Li Daochong looked at the countless spirit talismans being used up. Even he felt a little pained. The number of malicious ghosts had already been reduced by half. The same went for the lizard men. Both sides had suffered similar losses. When the king of Kukui and the White Witch appeared, the malicious ghosts and lizard men immediately quieted down. The king of Kukui and the White Witch stood side by side, staring at Lu Mei and the others. King Luo Feng threw more than 10 spirit talismans at the king of Kukui. The king of Kukui smiled coldly. He didn't seem to make any movements. His body shook, and a wave of death chi came out with a loud bang. More than 10 spirit talismans were shot out. Half of them were dissolved by the death chi. The king of Kukui stretched out his hand. His long arm extended more than 10 meters and grabbed the king Luo Feng. If you don't want him to die, then stop, the king of Kukui said sternly. At the same time, he increased the strength of his hand. The king Luo Feng wanted to speak, but his neck was tightly gripped. He couldn't make a sound at all. It was the first to stop. Lu Mei and Wang Dongming also stopped. However, the 3 of them had a level 8 spirit talisman hidden in their hands. This was their last trump card. Level 5 or 6 spirit talismans were of no use to the king of Kukui and the White Witch. Only higher-level spirit talismans could pose a threat to them. Just as the other 3 stopped, the king of Kukui's eyes flashed. The strength of his hand didn't decrease. Instead, he increased the strength of his hand. He pulled back his hand and directly pulled the king Luo Feng to his side. You 3 tie yourselves up. Otherwise, I'll kill him. The king of Kukui laughed sinisterly. Boom! As soon as the king of Kukui finished speaking, a beam of light shot out from Chi. It accurately bombarded the back of the king of Kukui's head. The power of the explosion wasn't great, but the impact was great. Even the king of Kukui was shaken to the point of almost falling apart. Level 8 Tremor Talisman. The King Luophone took the opportunity to kick the king of Kukui in the chest. He quickly retreated and pulled away. The King Luophone barely escaped death. His eyes were filled with unconcealable panic. The king of Kukui was too powerful. He wasn't someone they could deal with. Although the king of Kukui was shaken, it only took a few seconds for him to recover. The white witch hadn't even made a move. The king of Kukui was already unable to resist. The King Luophone didn't hesitate. He activated his telekinesis, and a beam of light shot out from his storage ring. A palm-sized, round object appeared in his hand. The King Luophone tossed the round object several meters above the heads of the four people. Pop, pop, pop. Spirit energy flickered. The round object emitted a faint yellow barrier. Bang! As soon as the barrier took shape, a muffled sound rang out. The king of Kukui's hand reached out again. The human cultivator slipped from his grasp, which made him very angry. The withered hand reached out quickly, but this time it wasn't able to grab the King Luophone. It was intercepted by the barrier. The withered hand hit the barrier with a muffled sound. The barrier covered a radius of 30 meters. Even a huge black rockly Daochong was hiding and was enveloped. Damn it! The king of Kukui cursed. The white witch standing to the side sneered. She glanced at the king of Kukui as if she was looking at an idiot. Then the white witch's hand moved. The soul-reaping chain shot out like a snake and drilled into the ground. The four people protected by the barrier had just breathed a sigh of relief when they saw the chain burrowing into the ground. Their hearts suddenly jumped. The weakest part of the barrier was the underground. The soul-reaping chain violently slammed into the ground, bombarding the barrier again and again. There was a loud boom. A few minutes later, the soul-reaping chain finally smashed a small hole in the barrier below and drilled out. Bang! The soul-reaping chain shot up from the ground just below the huge black rockly Daochong was hiding in. This time, the huge black rock was directly smashed into pieces. This little bit of impact naturally had no effect on Li Daochong. But at this critical moment, the poison in Li Daochong's body stirred, causing him to feel pain in his chest. His face immediately turned pale. Li Daochong staggered. His body was unsteady, and he was hit by a watermelon-sized rock. Because Li Daochong's poison had flared up, his body was in a defenseless state. The impact of the huge rock's explosion sent him flying. Li Daochong slammed into the barrier and bounced back, slamming heavily into the ground. Lu Mei and the others naturally noticed Li Daochong's presence. When Lu Mei and Li Daochong's eyes met, the former's beautiful eyes instantly widened. She looked at the latter in disbelief. Li Daochong? You? Why are you here? Mobile phone MOM NOADS 81 ZZZZZZ. Chapter 644. Lu Mei recognized Li Daochong at a glance, and her face was full of surprise. She had never thought that she would meet Li Daochong here at this juncture. Covering his chest, Li Daochong slowly stood up from the ground. Just now, his chest was churning, and the poison was stirred up, but now it calmed down, and he was fine. This damned poison was really troublesome. Li Daochong was annoyed, but there was nothing he could do. He looked inside himself and confirmed that he was fine. Then he looked at Lu Mei and replied, I also want to ask you the same thing. Lu Mei stared at Li Daochong with a complicated expression. It was naturally heartwarming to meet an old friend in this damned place. But Lu Mei looked down on Li Daochong at that time. She even thought that such a waste should not live in this world. But Lu Mei never thought that Li Daochong would grow so fast. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was abnormal. The whole Blue Bay Star's geniuses were overshadowed by him. There was no comparison at all. After being slapped in the face, Lu Mei naturally had no face to hang around in front of him. Although Lu Mei and Ouyang Qian were good friends, because of Li Daocheng, they were estranged from each other. Lu Mei later transferred to another university in Blue Bay Star to study. She also knew her own weight. With the support of her family and Lu Mei's ability, she would be able to cultivate to the foundation establishment stage at most. At this moment, seeing Li Daocheng, Lu Mei's mood was complicated. There was the joy of seeing an old friend, the guilt of being snobbish, and a little shyness. Li Daocheng's appearance should be a great help, but Lu Mei found that Li Daocheng's expression was not right. Lu Mei glanced at her wristwatch subconsciously. It showed that Li Daocheng's cultivation was only at the foundation establishment stage, which was almost the same as hers. Lu Mei recalled the past. At that time, although Li Daocheng was indeed powerful, he was only in the qi gathering stage. 2 or 3 years had passed, and it was not strange for him to be in the foundation establishment stage. Too many geniuses were dazzling at the beginning, but later on, they became weaker and weaker, and some simply stagnated. Anything could happen on the path of cultivation, so there was nothing strange about it. Lu Mei couldn't remember the last time she saw Li Daocheng. After the joint examination of 100 schools, something happened. The Lu family offended the underground forces of Blue Bay Star. Lu Mei was caught and thrown into a dungeon. She fainted under the attack of a strange shock wave. When she woke up, she was already in this godforsaken place. She stayed here for 2 or 3 years. At first, Lu Mei tried hard to find her way home, but as time passed, she gradually gave up the idea. Now, she had gradually integrated into the human cultivators here. The moment she saw Li Daocheng, many scenes of the past flashed through Lu Mei's mind, as if everything had happened yesterday. Boom! There was a loud noise. It pulled Lu Mei back from her thoughts. She lost her balance and almost fell down. The soul-hooking chains entered the protective shield and attacked King Luo Feng and the other two like crazy snakes. The loud noise just now was caused by Wang Dongming releasing a level 8 talisman. However, the bombardment of a level 8 talisman didn't cause much damage to the soul-hooking chains. With a swoosh, the soul-hooking chains shot towards Lu Mei. When King Luo Feng saw this, several silver swords flew out from behind his hand, and the level 8 talisman in Qier's hand also shot out. Lu Mei was seriously injured and didn't have the strength to dodge. In addition, Li Daocheng's appearance made her a little absent-minded, so she stood motionless in her place. Li Daocheng's divine sense moved, and in an instant, he activated his telekinesis to attack. Netherworld treasures were the same as spirit treasures. When they reached a high level, they would produce a tool spirit. Therefore, telekinesis attacks were equally effective on magic treasures and spirit treasures. Boom! Dang, dang, dang. The spirit treasures exploded, and several flying swords hacked at the soul-hooking chains, bursting into fierce sparks. King Luo Feng and the other 3 nervously watched the huge fireball ignite after the fire talisman exploded. The soul-hooking chains were engulfed in flames. The level 8 fire talisman was powerful enough, but King Luo Feng and the other 3 didn't think it could destroy the soul-hooking chains. The white witch inside the protective shield sneered. The soul-hooking chains were infinitely close to a magic treasure. How could a mere small talisman destroy it? Those flying swords were even more worthless. Whoosh! The flames dissipated, and the soul-hooking chains froze in the void. After a few seconds, it lost all support and fell from the sky like an ordinary iron chain. The white witch's sneer froze, and she immediately focused on controlling the soul-hooking chains. There was no response. The white witch's palms were sweating. The soul-hooking chains was her natal magic treasure, but she had completely lost contact with it. What happened? The white witch felt a chill down her spine, and her eyes were full of doubts. King Luo Feng, Qi Lu Mei, and Wang Dongming were also surprised. That was it. Qi are you sure your talisman is a level 8 talisman? King Luo Feng asked in surprise. Yes, I'm sure. Even she herself was a little uncertain. Li Daochong remained calm and collected, but there was a trace of imperceptible throbbing in his dark eyes. There was indeed a dead soul in the soul-hooking chains, which was the tool spirit of the magic treasure. Li Daochong's telekinesis killed it directly, and the blood-boiling level-up device even issued a notification that the soul power had been converted into spiritual energy. Of course, no one else knew about this. The White Witch was shocked and angry. Her most prized treasure was gone just like that. Unforgivable. The White Witch's anger surged, and she punched the protective shield. Boom! The protective shield shook violently, and the ground trembled along with it. King Luofeng and the other three looked serious. Lu Mei, is this your friend? Wang Dongming saw that Li Daochong's face was pale and bloodless, and his aura was weak, so he somewhat looked down on him. In addition, their current situation was extremely bad, and it could even be said that it was very dangerous. They couldn't even protect themselves, so how could they have the time to take care of a burden? Wang Dongming was thinking about how to escape at this time. There was no way they could win in a fight, so there was no need to think about it. The lizardmen and malicious ghosts were already very difficult to deal with, not to mention the White Witch and the King of Kukui. There was also the even more terrifying soul catcher Ghost King behind them, who could easily turn the four of them into ashes with a single finger. However, Wang Dongming didn't understand why the soul catcher Ghost King didn't come over, but instead hovered motionlessly in the air above the canyon. Yes, Lu Mei nodded and replied. Fellow Taoist, are you poisoned? King Luofeng couldn't help but ask when he saw Li Daochong's torn clothes, and saw that the skin inside was greenish-black in color. Li Daochong nodded slightly, and didn't hide it. Lu Mei and the other three revealed a hint of embarrassment in their eyes, especially Wang Dongming, who even frowned, and then said to King Luofeng, King Luofeng, the flying talisman can only carry 2 people, and now there are only 4 of us. If we include this kid, our flying speed will be greatly reduced. We can't escape with the flying talisman. Instead of running, why don't we take a risk and use this? King Luofeng said, and with a flash of brilliance in his hand, he took out a black pistol from his storage ring. Li Daochong's expression changed slightly. The gun's shape was very similar to the one he saw in Wuxia village. However, this gun's muzzle was slightly larger, and the barrel was also longer. When Lu Mei and the other 2 saw the gun, they all gasped, as if they had seen something shocking. King Luofeng, why do you have the green pheasant? Wang Dongming cried out. I specifically rented it from the treasure hall before we set off. King Luofeng looked at the gun in his hand and replied, although the green pheasant is powerful, one isn't enough. Lu Mei said, I have another one here. Cheer said, and a gun shaped like a green pheasant appeared in her hand. Green pheasant. Wang Dongming called again, but this time his eyes revealed a little disappointment. The tribe still had a preference for people with the blood of the fox race. Qing Ji and Qing Wan, these 2 spiritual guns were the most precious treasures of the tribe. Wang Dongming asked himself if he wanted to rent them. Those old guys in the treasure tool hall would never lend them to him. Wang Dongming was angry, but he couldn't vent it on King Luofeng and Cheer. Lu Mei was his current target, so he couldn't offend her. The only one left was the kid he didn't know. Wang Dongming tried his best to conceal the unhappiness in his heart. He coldly glanced at Li Daochong and said, Kid, you're lucky to have met us. Otherwise, if you appeared in this place today, you wouldn't even know how you died. In the end, not even your bones would be left. Don't stand there like a fool. Hurry up and get behind us. Don't be blown away by the wind from the spear. Chapter 645. Li Daochong didn't care about Wang Dongming's sarcastic remarks. He stood there without any intention of moving. Lu Mei felt guilty about Li Daochong. At the same time, she had some understanding of this old friend of hers. Seeing that he didn't move, she thought that his stubbornness had flared up again. She said anxiously, Li Daochong, come here quickly. Qingji and Qingwan are high-explosive spirit magnetic guns. They're very powerful. Even Jindan cultivators can't withstand them. Come behind me. Li Daochong glanced at Lu Mei. Naturally, he didn't have a good impression of this girl in the past. At first, he even hated her. But the past was the past. After all, Lu Mei didn't really do anything to him. It was just her nature to look down on him. Li Daochong didn't hold a grudge because of this. At this time, when he saw that Lu Mei's emotions weren't fake and that she was really worried about his safety, he couldn't help but curl his lips. He reached out and touched the shabi that was squatting on his shoulder. Only then did he walk over. Wang Dongming looked at the spirit magnetic guns in King Luo Feng and Qi Er's hands, and his heart burned with anger for no reason. He felt that Li Daochong was more and more unpleasant to the eye. He felt that it was troublesome to have such a burden. Why are you dawdling? Hurry up. Can't you see that the protective shield is about to be broken? The shabi grinned and growled at Wang Dongming. Its eyes revealed a fierce light. Stinky monkey, I'll tear off your monkey mouth if you scream again. Wang Dongming glared at the shabi. Li Daochong frowned. Just as he was about to say something, there was a loud bang, and the protective shield shook violently. Lu Mei said anxiously, Li Daochong, hurry up. King Luo Feng's handsome face also showed some repulsion. He said coldly, Friend, if it weren't for Lu Mei, I would have fired even if you didn't move. Please hurry up. Li Daochong's attention was no longer here, so he didn't hear what they were saying. Just as the protective shield was trembling violently, Li Daochong's divine sense tightened as he sensed a familiar aura. This aura was not spirit qi, but demonic qi. At the same time, the motionless soul catcher ghost dynasty sped over from the void. There was another loud bang. The crumbling protective barrier was completely shattered by the combined attack of the White Witch and the King of Kukui. At this moment, Li Daochong had yet to reach the back of the four. King Luo Feng, it's too late. Shoot. Qi. Her glanced at Li Daochong and said coldly. The meaning behind his words was obvious. He was not going to care about Li Daochong's life or death. King Luo Feng nodded slightly. He raised his hand and pointed the Akiji at the White Witch. Qi, pointed the Akiji at the King of Kukui. There was a buzzing sound. A circle of light condensed at the muzzles of the two spirit magnetic guns. The spirit magnetic energy was highly concentrated, and there was a silver bullet of exorcism in the barrels of the two guns. Compared to the spirit magnetic guns, the silver bullet of exorcism was actually more precious. This was because the production of this powerful silver bullet not only required precious magic silver and magic gold, but also required a one-star refiner to spend several days to refine one. Bang, bang. 2 tongues of flame spurted out from the muzzles. At that moment, the spiritual qi in King Luo Feng and Qi Er's bodies seemed to have been hollowed out. The recoil of the Akiji and Akiji was extremely strong. King Luo Feng and Qi were directly pushed back by the powerful recoil. Deep gullies were left under their feet, and they only stopped after sliding more than 50 meters. 2 silver bullets of exorcism were shot out under the high explosive spiritual pressure. The White Witch and the King of Kukui broke the protective barrier and were about to take down King Luo Feng and the other 3 people in one fell swoop. But before they could make a move, 2 silver lights shot out at an astonishing speed. With the strength of the White Witch and the King of Kukui, there was no way for them to avoid it. The brilliance of these 2 silver lights contained something that the White Witch and the King of Kukui were extremely afraid of. The 2 nether ghosts were extremely frightened. In an instant, they felt that they were doomed eternally. At this moment, 2 black lights shot out from behind the White Witch and the King of Kukui. Boom! There was a loud noise that shook the sky. 2 small mushroom clouds roared into the sky. The entire cliff platform trembled violently. The black boulders on the mountain kept rolling down. The cliff below cracked, and 1/3 of the area collapsed. The White Witch and the King of Kukui were directly sent flying several kilometers away, but they did not suffer fatal injuries. There was a whoosh. The Soul Capturer Ghost King appeared on the cliff. In the void, The White Witch and the King of Kukui were still in shock. They looked at each other and saw the fear in each other's eyes. The two silver lights just now were too terrifying. If not for the Soul Capturer Ghost King's help, they would have been annihilated. In the endless mountain range, the most terrifying thing was never the powerful human cultivators, nor the witch ghosts that had evolved into witch bodies. Instead, it was these terrifyingly powerful spirit magnetic magic treasures. When the White Witch and the King of Kukui returned, King Luo Feng and the other 3 people looked desperate. The 4 people hurriedly took out all kinds of protective magic treasures on their bodies, trying to block the 3 nether ghosts. But they knew that it would be a miracle if these protective magic treasures could last for a few minutes. Wang Dongming was completely dumbfounded. No use? How is that possible? King Luo Feng's face showed some bitterness. Cheer stared at the 3 nether ghosts in front of her with a pair of big, beautiful eyes. King Luo Feng, even Qing Ji and Qing Luan are useless? Chi-Er's voice trembled. The Soul Capture Ghost King is too strong. Chi-Er, I'm sorry. I overestimated the power of Qing Ji and Qing Luan. King Luo Feng said apologetically. King Luo Feng, don't say that. It's not your fault. The Wall of Judgment is about to be broken. If not for the Fox Immortal's arrival a year ago, the Wall of Judgment would have been destroyed. Now that the Fox Immortal is missing, if we can't find her, once the Wall of Judgment is broken, the last few spirit islands in the Spirit Sea will be devoured by the nether ghosts. Chi-Er choked. Yes, if we can't find the Fox Immortal, we will all die. It's just a matter of time. King Luo Feng sighed in loneliness. What are you two talking about? Even if we die, we can't just wait for death. Lu Mei heard the two's conversation and said anxiously, what else can we do but wait for death? Lu Mei, do you think we can make waves if we fight with our lives on the line? Forget it. I think it's better to stay alive than to fight with our lives on the line. Let's run. Wang Dongming's eyes were full of fear. In his opinion, running away was the only choice. Can we escape? Chi-Er murmured. Why can't we escape? The Flying Talisman's speed is comparable to the extreme speed of the Upper Immortals in ancient times. I don't believe that the Soul Capturer Ghost King can be faster than the Upper Immortals. Wang Dongming tried his best to persuade the other 3. As for Li Daochong, he didn't even consider it. But one Flying Talisman can't reach its maximum speed with 4 people. Chi-Er added, compared to Lord Luofeng's desolation and Lu Mei's desperation, this mixed blood girl was more inclined to Wang Dongming's idea of where there's life, there's hope. There's always hope if you're alive, but there's nothing if you're dead. I have another talisman here. Wang Dongming stretched out his hand, and a talisman flickering with light appeared in his hand. It was a flying talisman, exactly the same as the one King Luo Feng carried. They were both grade 8 flying talismans. Wang Dongming, what did you get it? King Luo Feng asked reflexively. My father left it to me, Wang Dongming replied. In such a dangerous situation, King Luo Feng still cared about the origin of the flying talisman. It seemed a bit strange. In fact, the flying talisman was an extremely precious item in their tribe. Only those cultivators who had made great contributions to the tribe or completed extremely dangerous missions would be able to obtain it. The one in King Luo Feng's hand was given to him by the first elder as a precaution before he left. 2 talismans aren't enough, Chi suddenly said. Hearing this, Lu Mei's pretty face revealed a trace of embarrassment. She couldn't help but look at Li Daochong. At this moment, Li Daochong's expression suddenly changed. His eyes were unfocused, and he looked completely listless. He even looked a little sluggish. In fact, Li Daochong's attention had long been elsewhere. He had been concentrating on searching for that familiar demonic aura that had just flashed by. If not for that, Li Daochong would have already dealt with the soul-devouring Ghost King. However, that demonic aura had been fleeting. Li Daochong felt that if he didn't immediately track it down, it was very likely that he would never be able to find it again. Li Daochong's spiritual force swept around, and the corners of his mouth curved into a slight smile. There were quite a few familiar faces in this damn place. Although it had only flashed for a moment, Li Daochong had still captured this demonic aura. He was certain that he knew the owner of this demonic aura. Qi Er's words stunned King Luo Feng for a moment. He then said, "One flying talisman can carry 2 people. There are 5 of us, so one of them must carry 3 people." Wang Dongming glanced indifferently at Li Daochong and continued, "We don't know that person. There's no need to bring him along." Lu Mei became anxious. "No, he's my friend." Wang Dongming followed up. "Mayor, now is not the time to be emotional. You haven't seen him for a long time. Also, when I sent you voice transmission just now, you said that you weren't familiar with him. It's not worth risking everyone's lives for an unrelated person. He's just a burden. Let him fend for himself." Chapter 646. Lu Mei said that she wasn't familiar with Li Daochong. That was true. They didn't have much to do with each other. They had only gone to the same school. They had only seen each other and knew that they didn't even know each other. But in a place like this, meeting someone from the same place, even if they were from the same cultivation planet, was a completely different feeling. As the saying goes, when fellow townsmen see fellow townsmen, their eyes will be filled with tears. Although Lu Mei and Li Daochong weren't at the point where their eyes would be filled with tears, Lu Mei felt closer to Li Daochong. Even though she had been here for more than a year, she didn't have much affection for this place. Home was home after all. Lu Mei naturally didn't want to leave Li Daochong behind. But the flight talisman didn't belong to her, so she couldn't make the decision. Wang Dongming said that they wouldn't take Li Daochong. Lu Mei was anxious, but she didn't know what to do. It wasn't easy to meet someone from her hometown in this godforsaken place. Lu Mei really wanted to know how Li Daochong got here. Lu Mei knew that she couldn't persuade Wang Dongming, so she turned to King Luo Feng with a pleading look in her eyes. "King Luo Feng, take my friend with you. He's from the same place as me. Maybe he knows how to get out of here." King Luo Feng was silent. Boom! With a loud bang, the protective shield that had been propped up was completely shattered. The situation was so critical that King Luo Feng didn't have time to think. He said with a serious expression, "We can't afford to think too much." With that, King Luo Feng was about to use the flight talisman. Wang Dongming's eyes lit up. Lu Mei bit her lower lip and looked apologetically at Li Daochong. Her eyes were filled with helplessness and regret. However, Li Daochong didn't even look at her. His head was slightly lowered, as if he was thinking about something. Bang! 2 fist-sized black fireballs streaked across the sky at a speed that was hard to see with the naked eye. Before King Luo Feng and Wang Dongming could react, the 2 flight talismans in their hands were engulfed by 2 black flames that seemed to have teleported and disappeared. "No!" Wang Dongming's eyes widened in horror as he looked at the charred flying talisman in his hand. He let out a heart-wrenching roar. However, no matter how loud he shouted, it was useless. The 2 flight talismans disappeared into the void, just like that. Wang Dongming was in despair. The fear in his eyes continued to spread. His hand was still holding the flying talisman, but at this moment his hand was trembling slightly. King Luo Feng, Qi and Lu Mei were stunned at first. Their hearts skipped a beat, and they couldn't accept it. But that kind of shocked expression only lasted for a short time, and then a touch of determination shot out from their eyes. Now that the treasure was gone, he could only fight to the death. Almost at the same time, the 3 of them took out their magic weapons. Wang Dongming stood there, the horror on his face gradually becoming ferocious. "It's all your fault. It's all your fault." Wang Dongming suddenly let out a hysterical roar, looking at Li Daochong with red eyes. "If you, this burden, hadn't suddenly appeared at this juncture, there wouldn't have been so much nonsense to talk about. Just now, Mayor wouldn't have asked to bring you along. Without this nonsense, we would have already run away." King Luo Feng and the other 2 were stunned for a moment. They didn't know what was wrong with Wang Dongming. Wang Dongming was not willing to die like this, but the moment the flight talisman was burned, he had already been sentenced to death, and it was to be executed immediately. Wang Dongming's desperate mood was obvious. An indescribable anger rose in his despair, and this flame was all directed at Li Daocheng. In his view, everything was caused by Li Daocheng. Wang Dongming lost his mind. He stretched out his hand, and a long sword appeared in his hand. He roared at Li Daocheng, "Die!" Li Daocheng didn't look at Wang Dongming from beginning to end. He was immersed in his own world, concentrating on searching for that demonic aura. The white, which looked at Wang Dongming's actions and sneered, "The human race is really a kind of incomprehensible creature. Even at this time, they're still killing each other." The king of Kukui's ash-gray face was expressionless. He just looked indifferently at Wang Dongming, who was charging at Li Daocheng. Suddenly, his figure flashed and disappeared. In the next moment, the king of Kukui appeared between Wang Dongming and Li Daocheng. The moment Wang Dongming saw the king of Kukui, he was so frightened that he suddenly stopped and hurriedly stopped his charge. The king of Kukui licked his lips. He stared at Wang Dongming and said, "I can't let you destroy such good food." Wang Dongming was so frightened that he almost peed his pants. When did he get so close to an undead creature like the king of Kukui? Wang Dongming was so frightened that he kept retreating. The king of Kukui stretched out his hand. That withered hand extended more than 10 meters and grabbed Wang Dongming. Wang Dongming didn't have any reaction at all. The withered hand grabbed his neck tightly. When King Luo Feng, Qi and Lu Mei saw this, they naturally couldn't leave him to die. The three of them weren't scared out of their wits like Wang Dongming. The three of them felt that since they were going to die anyway, they might as well die with a little backbone. At most, they would just self-destruct. King Luo Feng held the silver fox sword in his hand and ruthlessly slashed at the king of Kukui's withered arm. Qi Er's weapon was a crescent scimitar. It was incomparably sharp and was made from the star soul crystal core. This kind of magic metal also had an additional damage effect on undead creatures. Lu Mei's weapon was a slender, flexible sword. It was like a silver snake that flicked its silver tongue. Clang, clang, clang. 3 crisp sounds were heard. The 3 weapons hit their target and accurately slashed at the king of Kukui's extended arm. The 3 of them had used all of their strength in this attack. However, apart from the crisp sounds, there wasn't even a cut mark left on the withered arm. The 3 weapons were all chipped. The king of Kukui's completed shaman body was actually much stronger than the 3's treasures. "What?" King Luo Feng cried out in shock. Crack! Almost at the same time, the long sword in his hand broke into 2. Qi Er's weapon broke immediately after. Only Lu Mei's flexible sword didn't break because of its soft texture. The king of Kukui grabbed Wang Dongjuan's withered arm and didn't move. His other withered arm stretched out and swept across the air. King Luo Feng, Qi and Lu Mei were swept away together. The 3 of them were sent flying as if they had been hit by an ancient beast that was sprinting at full speed. The 3 of them crashed heavily on the ground and slid hundreds of meters away. With a boom, they hit the mountain wall behind them. The Har mountain wall cracked. King Luo Feng spat out a mouthful of blood. One of Qi Er's arms was in a strange shape. It was broken into 5 sections. Half of Lu Mei's face was covered in blood. Blood kept flowing out her mouth. The 3 of them were seriously injured, and their fighting strength was greatly reduced. Wang Dongjuan looked at all this in fear. He was restrained by the withered arm and couldn't move. At this moment, his legs were trembling violently, and he couldn't hold back the urge to urinate. Although King Luo Feng and the other 2's fighting strength was greatly reduced, it wasn't to the point where they couldn't move. The 3 of them looked at each other and saw the determination in each other's eyes. As the last cultivators of the spiritual island, how could they be scared? Even if they died, they would bloom the most beautiful fireworks in their lives. Self-destruction had always been a cultivator's strongest trump card. Its power was so great that it could destroy the world. The higher the cultivation, the greater the power of self-destruction. The self-destruction of a foundation establishment cultivator was enough to blow up a few mountains. King Luo Feng and Qi held hands and nodded to each other. With a swoosh, They flew towards the king of Kukui at the same time. Lu Mei glanced at Li Daochong and flew after them. However, the three of them were only 10 meters away from the king of Kukui when suddenly, a huge, invisible death aura blocked them. They couldn't get close to the king of Kukui. You want to self-destruct? Hee hee, in your dreams. The king of Kukui sneered. King Luo Feng and the other two's expressions changed. Lu Mei screamed, "Quickly self-destruct, or it will be too late." However, it was still too late. The three of them tried to burn the Foundation Establishment placenta, but the spiritual energy in their bodies was out of control. A gust of death aura invaded their bodies and controlled their spiritual energy. The three of them were shocked. They couldn't maintain their flying momentum, and all of them fell to the ground. King Luo Feng suddenly said, "This death aura is strange. Let's get out of here first." The three of them were invaded by the death aura. Their spiritual energy was controlled, but they didn't lose their ability to move. As soon as King Luo Feng finished speaking, the three of them turned around and ran. Lu Mei turned around and ran a few steps. Suddenly, her face froze. Li Daochong, who was motionless a moment ago, seemed to have regained consciousness. He raised his head and looked at her. His pale face was calm, and he walked towards her. Lu Mei was dumbfounded. She didn't know what Li Daochong wanted to do until they brushed past each other. Lu Mei's heart skipped a beat. Without stopping, she turned to Li Daochong and shouted, "Li Daochong, you're going the wrong way. This way." Chapter 647. From the beginning, Lu Mei felt that Li Daochong's condition was not right. There were obvious signs of poisoning. She thought that he had lost his mind because of the poison and didn't know what he was doing. She stopped and tried to grab Li Daochong. Lu Mei grabbed the air. Huh? She was puzzled. The distance was very close, just an arm's length. How could she grab the air? Li Daochong's back was in front of her, but in the blink of an eye, he was more than 10 meters away. Lu Mei was stunned. She wanted to chase Li Daochong. Just as she was about to turn around, King Luo Feng pulled her back. "Don't worry about him. He's dead if he enters the king of Kukui's death field," King Luo Feng said as he dragged Lu Mei out of the death field. Lu Mei knew that she couldn't save Li Daochong. With regret in her eyes, she watched Li Daochong walk toward the king of Kukui. She sighed in her heart. The king of Kukui's death field lowered the surrounding temperature by dozens of degrees. A layer of frost condensed on the ground. Wang Dongming, who was scared out of his wits, trembled all over. There were obvious water stains on his legs. Wang Dongming knew that he was going to die. He was completely wrapped in fear. But at this time, he saw Li Daochong walking toward him like an idiot. Wang Dongming smiled inexplicably. He was not alone on the road to hell. It was better to have someone with him than to die alone. This guy must be suffering from the poison. He didn't know what he was doing. Wang Dongming and Lu Mei had the same thought. Li Daochong looked muddle-headed from the moment he appeared. He didn't respond to Wang Dongming's words. Wang Dongming felt that something was wrong. When people were unlucky, they would gloat when they saw other people's misfortune. At least they were not alone on the road. Wang Dongming's current state of mind was more or less the same. Someone dying in front of him was perhaps the greatest relief right now. The king of Kukui glanced at Li Daochong, who was approaching him, and a cold smile appeared on his withered face. "I wanted to put you last, but since you're in such a hurry, let's change the order and start from the inside." After saying that, the king of Kukui's other hand shot out towards Li Daochong. Seeing this scene, Wang Dongming's fearful face revealed a sinister smile. Seeing this burden that had appeared out of nowhere get killed, he felt very satisfied. Bang! Just as the king of Kukui's withered hand shot out, Li Daochong raised his hand and punched out. Crack! After a muffled sound, there was the horrifying sound of broken bones. Lu Mei turned her face away. She couldn't bear to look. She didn't need to look to know that Li Daochong's arm was broken into several pieces. No, that's impossible. However, not long after Lu Mei turned her face away, she heard Chiyer's stuttering voice. Puzzled, Lu Mei turned her face back. The moment she looked over, Her mouth opened wide, and her face was blank. Li Daochong was facing the king of Kukui head-on. At this moment, he was as still as a mountain. The latter's extended, withered hand broke into more than 10 pieces and fell to the ground. What? The White Witch, who was watching from afar, was surprised. The flames in the Soul Catcher Ghost King's eyes flickered a few times. Li Daochong's green back was reflected in them. The king of Kukui was even more incredulous. However, the piercing pain gave him no time to think about anything else. Wang Dongming was flabbergasted, his eyes bulging out of their sockets. He stood there like a frozen frog, his mind completely blank. Li Daochong punched out and continued walking toward the king of Kukui. He was neither in a hurry nor in a hurry, maintaining the same steady pace as before. It didn't seem like he was fighting nether ghosts at all. He was clearly just taking a stroll. Creak, creak. The Shabi sitting on Li Daochong's shoulder suddenly cried out. "This one is mine." "That white one is yours," Li Daochong said indifferently. The Shabi immediately quieted down. Its large, adorable eyes greedily looked at the king of Kukui, as well as a bit of sympathy. Li Daochong's actions thoroughly enraged the king of Kukui. "You're trying to scare me. Damned human cultivator. I'll let you experience the terror of the fire of the Hades." Huh. The king of Kukui felt an indescribable sense of fear from Li Daochong. It was as if he was facing a superior nether demon. He couldn't help but feel afraid. This feeling made the king of Kukui extremely unhappy. With a roar, he opened his mouth, and a black flame instantly condensed within. The king of Kukui didn't hold back. He wanted to instantly kill Li Daochong, but just as he opened his mouth, a large hand covered it. Li Daochong had been 10-some meters away, but in a flash, he appeared in front of the king of Kukui. Lume saw Li Daochong actually use his hand to cover the king of Kukui's mouth. "Careful, that's nether fire," she cried out. Li Daochong still did as he pleased. His large hand covered the king of Kukui's mouth tightly, and he said indifferently, "Nether fire is a good thing. Don't waste it." The king of Kukui stared at Li Daochong with a pair of empty eyes that were burning with nether fire. What kind of monster was this? Before the nether fire could be spat out, it was completely absorbed by Li Daochong. The Thunder Infant was now worried about not being able to replenish its energy, and the nether fire was the best thing to convert. When Li Daochong obtained the Yang Thunder, it was converted by absorbing the nether fire. The king of Kukui, who had been incomparably terrifying just a moment ago, became abnormally nervous at this moment. The withered hand that was holding Wang Dongming quickly loosened and fiercely grabbed at Li Daochong. However, just as the withered hand moved, Li Daochong's hand that was covering the king of Kukui's mouth suddenly exerted force. Bang! Li Daochong directly exerted force and fiercely pressed the king of Kukui's head into the ground. The ground was smashed into a deep pit, and the king of Kukui's head was completely submerged in the pit. In the eyes of King Luo Feng, Chi Lu Mei, and Wang Dongming, the king of Kukui was extremely terrifying. At this time, Li Daochong was playing with him as he wished, doing whatever he wanted. The king of Kukui didn't even have the slightest room to fight back. Lu Mei's pretty face was filled with shock. All the images that flashed through her mind were about Li Daochong's counterattack on the Blue Bay Star. From that moment on, anything that happened to Li Daochong was nothing strange. Crack! There was a crisp sound. Li Daochong twisted the king of Kukui's head off his neck. Squeak! Squatting on Li Daochong's shoulder, the Shabi let out a few excited cries and waved its little hands. Squeak! Li Daochong grabbed the king of Kukui's head. The latter's face was filled with disbelief. In the next moment, Li Daochong crushed his head to pieces. The head was never a vital point of the netherworld. The king of Kukui's headless body quickly floated up. However, this headless corpse in a black robe, which looked extremely terrifying, no longer had the dignity that a ghost should have. It turned into a black cloud and was about to escape. But how could Li Daochong give it a chance? Whoosh! Whoosh! A dim dark green brilliance flashed through the black cloud with a few wisps of electricity. Bang! The black cloud that was split in half instantly exploded and dissipated, turning into nothingness. In the depths of Li Daocheng's sea of consciousness, the intermittent and stuttering prompt sounded. A stream of spiritual energy was formed. Li Daocheng quickly stored this spiritual energy. Now, the excess spiritual energy could only be stored temporarily and could not be used effectively. Li Daocheng's primordial spirit was still in a dispirited state. If not, with his current strength of the middle stage of deity transformation, how could this godforsaken place trap him? The king of Kukui was killed just like that. King Luo Feng, Qi and Lu Mei could not believe that all this was true. Was there anyone in this world who could kill the king of Kukui so easily? Even the strongest people in the tribe could not do it. Wang Dongming never dreamed that in this situation where he was bound to die, not only did he not die, but he also did not even have a single hair on his body injured. However, his heart was in turmoil and his intestines were green with regret. He stood there with a dull expression, watching Li Daocheng wantonly ravage the king of Kukui. This young man who had been standing there in a daze and was severely poisoned turned out to be such a terrifying existence. When Li Daocheng killed the king of Kukui, the white witch trembled violently, and the tall white hat on her head almost shook off. After killing the king of Kukui, Li Daocheng held the rusty sung ink in his hand and turned to look at the white witch and the soul capturer ghost king. A blue-golden brilliance shot out from his eyes, as if it was going to pierce through the white witch and the soul capturer ghost king. This human cultivator's human soul is very powerful. I'm very hungry. White witch, go and hold him back. I'm going to use the soul capture technique. The soul capture ghost king's eerie and hoarse voice slowly rang out. The white witch's expression was filled with fear. She wanted to escape, but she did not dare. Why aren't you going? Do you want to disobey my orders? The white witch's greenish-gray face flickered. The young man made her feel fear, but the soul capture ghost king was even more terrifying. The white witch felt the powerful pressure and killing intent from the soul capture ghost king. She did not dare to hesitate any longer. She braced herself and shot out in a white flash. Li Daocheng's lips curled up slightly. He patted the shabby. It's yours. Squeak, squeak. The shabby squeaked excitedly. The little monkey jumped off Li Daocheng's shoulder with a whoosh. The moment it jumped, a cloud of white smoke exploded from the shabby's body. Its body instantly grew into the form of an ancient ape. The soul capturer ghost king's eyes flickered. Before he could use the soul capturer technique, Li Daocheng had already appeared in front of him. The soul capturer ghost king felt a chill run down his spine. He did not dare to be careless. His green hand with sharp black nails grabbed at Li Daocheng. Clang! The green ghost claw and sung ink collided violently. Blue sparks exploded. The soul capturer ghost king let out a terrifying scream. That sound was not something that should be in the human world. If an ordinary person heard this sound, they would be scared out of their wits. However, the one who was truly scared out of its wits was the soul capturer ghost king. It let out such a scream because of the pain and fear that came from the depths of its dead soul. Li Daocheng's slash was accompanied by yang thunder. Even though its power was greatly reduced, it was still irresistible to a ghost of the soul capturer ghost king's level. The pain caused by the yang thunder drilling into the soul capturer ghost king's body was 100 times more painful than being burned by spirit chi. However, compared to the king of Kukui, the soul capturer ghost king was still much stronger. Li Daocheng killed the king of Kukui with one slash. However, the soul capturer ghost king only had a cut on his palm. Damn it, so you're a lightning-type cultivator. No wonder you could kill Ku Gue Na Si. However, your lightning power is useless against me. In order to show my respect to lightning-type cultivators, I'll use the ghost demon technique that I just learned not long ago. I've never used it before. Today, I'll use it on you. The Soul Capturer Ghost King quickly retreated dozens of meters to distance himself from Li Daocheng. Almost at the same time, a heart-wrenching scream came from the other side. King Luo Feng and the others were all focused on Li Daocheng. When they heard the scream, they turned to look. They saw the little monkey in the form of an ancient ape grabbing the white witch and tearing it in half. Its two hairy hands grabbed one half of the white witch's body. It raised one of its hands and bit down, biting off half of the white witch's head and eating it with relish. This scene was so strange. The soul-sucking and man-eating white, which was now eaten by an ancient ape. King Luo Feng, Qi and Lu Mei only felt that what had happened to the world. Wang Dongming sat on the ground, completely dumbfounded. Chapter 648. The black gas around the Soul Capturer Ghost King continued to condense, and the surrounding temperature dropped again. It was as if winter had arrived, and every breath he exhaled was white mist. King Luo Feng and the other three were shivering. Their bodies were so cold that they could not control themselves, and their eyes were filled with fear. The Soul Capturer Ghost King was too powerful for them, so powerful that they could not resist at all. So uncomfortable, Puff. Cheer spat out 3 words with a pained expression, and then spat out a mouthful of blood. Lu Mei was pale and speechless. She looked at Li Daocheng's back in horror. King Luo Feng was not in a good state either, and his whole body was frozen in place. Wang Dongjun was covered in a layer of frost from head to toe, and was completely enveloped by the cold air. Let's run, Lu Mei. No matter how powerful your friend is, he is no match for the Soul Capturer Ghost King. Qi said with difficulty. Lu Mei's blood froze in her chest, and she could not speak at all. King Luo Feng slowly retreated. In the battle, Li Daocheng was a little distracted for a moment, because the demonic aura had flickered again and then disappeared. The Soul Capturer Ghost King continued to gather power, and a sinister smile appeared on his gray face. Sorry to keep you waiting. Li Daocheng glanced at the Soul Capturer Ghost King, and his eyebrows twitched slightly. Tsang ink appeared in his hand instantly. Zung! A Tsang ink blade flashed out. Zung zung, with a few sparks. Whoosh! The Soul Capturer Ghost King, who was full of power, was directly split in half without any hesitation. With a slash, Li Daocheng shot out like a bolt of lightning and arrived in front of the Soul Capturer Ghost King that was split in half. His eyes flashed with blue-gold light. Heavenly Thunder Art, Eye of Thunder Punishment. 2 thunderbolts shot out from his eyes. The power was not comparable to before he was injured, but it was still like the 9 heavens' primordial thunder to the Soul Capturer Ghost King. Boom, crack. The terrifying Soul Capturer Ghost King was penetrated by the 2 thunderbolts and disappeared in an instant. King Luo Feng, Qi and Lu Mei were dumbstruck with their mouths wide open. Lu Mei looked at Li Daocheng with a strange expression. She knew that Li Daocheng was strong, but she didn't expect him to be this strong. One had to know that the #1 expert in Blue Bay Star, Li Daocheng's father, Li Tianyang, was no match for the Soul Assimilator Ghost King. Now, Li Daocheng had killed the Soul Assimilating Ghost King with a single slash. What was his cultivation level? Lu Mei was stunned. The wristwatch she was wearing had the function of detecting cultivation level. It always showed that Li Daocheng was a cultivator in the middle stage of the Foundation Establishment realm. At the beginning, he was only in the early stage of the Foundation Establishment realm. But how could a Foundation Establishment middle stage cultivator kill the Soul Capturer Ghost King? That was too illogical. If Lu Mei knew that Li Daocheng's true cultivation level was at the middle stage of the Soul Formation realm, what would she think? Li Daocheng's current limit was at the middle stage of the Jin Dan. In fact, for ordinary cultivators, this level was comparable to a Soul Assimilator Ghost. Compared to the Soul Assimilator Ghost King, it was weaker. At the very least, it needed to be at the peak stage of the Jin Dan to be able to compete with the Soul Assimilator Ghost King. However, Li Daocheng had grown through battles. Only by killing monsters could he increase his cultivation level and strength. Li Daocheng hadn't encountered any Hades ghosts except for high-level nether devils. Li Daocheng had fought almost everyone below the level of a nether devil. He had experienced all kinds of situations and was very experienced in battle. His Tsang Ink Saber was also very proficient. Most importantly, even though Li Daocheng's cultivation level was only at the middle stage of the Jin Dan, the moves he used were already beyond the scope of cultivation techniques. They were actually magical powers. Therefore, even though Li Daocheng was only at the foundation establishment stage, he could still kill the Soul Assimilator Ghost King. After killing the Soul Assimilator Ghost King, Li Daocheng naturally obtained Spirit Chi. After putting away the Tsang Ink, Li Daocheng's eyes were expressionless. His divine perception once again spread out to search for that demonic aura. The Shabi ate the white, which clean with relish. It burped and rubbed its stomach. It looked like it was still a long way from being full. A peak evil ghost was only an appetizer to the Shabi now. The white witch, the king of Kukui, and the Soul Assimilator Ghost King. These three great ghosts couldn't even withstand a single blow from Li Daocheng. They were killed in minutes. The remaining evil ghosts in the void and the lizard men standing at the edge of the cliff were all dumbfounded. The unsatisfied Shabi suddenly turned its furry head and looked at the lizard men and the evil ghosts in the sky. Its eyes flashed, and it cracked open its mouth to laugh. Thump, thump. The Shabi charged toward the lizard men with heavy steps. After charging for more than 10 steps, it jumped up and opened its mouth to take a deep breath into the void. Immediately, the scattered evil ghosts in the void rushed toward the Shabi as if they were attracted by a magnet. For a moment, the evil ghosts struggled with all their might, letting out terrifying roars. However, no matter how hard they struggled, it was useless. Instead, they were sucked into Shabi's mouth even faster. In just a short while, dozens of evil ghosts were sucked into the Shabi's stomach. The lizard men saw that something was wrong and turned to run. How could the Shabi let these little ghosts go? As the saying went, even a mosquito's leg was meat. The Shabi swept away the fallen leaves like a hungry lion. In a few seconds, it wiped out the lizard men. It was unknown what this monkey's stomach was made of. After eating so many evil ghosts, it didn't bulge at all. It was the same as usual. When Li Daocheng gave up on searching and retracted his divine sense, the Shabi had just wiped out all the evil ghosts and returned to Li Daocheng's side. Lu Mei and the others were in a daze. It wasn't until Li Daocheng walked in front of them that they suddenly came back to their senses. However, they all looked at Li Daocheng with intense fear in their eyes. What a joke. A cultivator who could instantly kill the Soul Assimilator Ghost King. If he wanted to kill them, it would be no different from stepping on an ant. Li Daocheng restrained his aura and almost couldn't sense it. He didn't release any pressure. However, this still gave Lu Mei and the others an extremely strong sense of oppression. How did you get here? Li Daocheng looked at Lu Mei and asked indifferently. Lu Mei calmed down and looked at Li Daocheng with some fear. Then, she glanced at the tall, ancient ape beside him. She swallowed her saliva and took a deep breath. Then, she recounted what had happened to her. As Li Daocheng listened to Lu Mei's story, the blue and golden light in his eyes flickered for no reason. Are you sure you were locked in the underground prison of the Heavenly Palace Club? Then, there was an earthquake and you fainted. When you woke up, you were here. Li Daocheng's heart skipped a beat. Yes, the earthquake was very violent. The entire prison collapsed. The shock wave knocked me out. I thought I was dead. When I woke up, I was lying on the beach. Lu Mei nodded and replied. Li Daocheng's thoughts went back to more than a year ago. At that time, the purpose of the Blood Knife Society was to find a spatial rift under the Heavenly Palace Club. That rift led to a Death Star. The human territory's spirit realm had been invaded by the Hades and was later repelled. However, the edge of the spirit realm was very unstable. After so many years, there were still many unstable spatial zones within the Shenghua Federation. The Blue Bay Star and the Red Sun Star were both in the Fourth Ring starfield. This was the inner circle of the Federation's outer circle. The space was much more stable than the critical Hades. However, there was still a probability of spatial rifts appearing. Li Daocheng had encountered spatial rifts on the Blue Bay Star and the Red Sun Star. The Blood Knife Society was the first to discover the spatial rift on the Blue Bay Star because it appeared under the Heavenly Palace Club. The Blood Knife Society almost destroyed Lu Feng's flying shuttle party. However, because of Li Daocheng, it was the Blood Knife Society that was destroyed in the end. Later, Li Daocheng passed through the spatial rift and arrived at the Death Star on the other side. He successfully killed the king of Kukui and many dark ghosts and advanced to the Gene Dance stage. However, when Li Daocheng returned from the spatial rift, he used the Gene Dan Thunder Tribulation to seal the spatial rift. After coming out, he did a lot of work. The spatial rift should have been completely sealed. If Lu Mei remembered correctly, she was indeed imprisoned in the underground prison of the Heavenly Palace Club. Then, the vibration that appeared at that time was most likely caused by the spatial rift spreading. She was sucked in by the spatial rift and was here. In other words, it was not the first time Li Daocheng had been here. He had been here once. Li Daocheng's lips moved slightly, and he looked a little surprised. It turns out that I have been here before. This Death Star was the one that was connected to the spatial rift that appeared under the Heavenly Palace Club. Li Daocheng's eyes flashed. If this was the case, then if he wanted to go back, he only needed to find the place where he came from. Although the spatial rift was sealed, the space there was much weaker than in other places. As long as Li Daocheng got rid of the demonic poison in his body and recovered to the middle stage of Huashan realm, he could open the spatial rift again. All the confusion seemed to have been solved after listening to Lu Mei's explanation. Except for why this Death Star was not invaded by Hades, all the other doubts were answered. Li Daocheng might still be curious about why Hades did not appear here, but it was obviously not as important as going home. Li Daocheng felt uneasy staying in this damn place. What if the prince of the Netherworld clan found this place through the death of the fiendish python? Li Daocheng's situation would be very dangerous. Where did you come from? Li Daocheng thought for a while and then asked. Spiritual Island. Lu Mei replied immediately. Spiritual Island? Is it the other side of the top-end mountains? Yes. Lu Mei also wanted to ask Li Daocheng how he came here, but after seeing how terrifying Li Daocheng was, she didn't dare to ask. After struggling in her heart for a while, she finally gave up and decided to find a time when there was no one around to ask. Take me to Spiritual Island, Li Daocheng said immediately. Li Daocheng's purpose of coming here was to cross the top-end mountains and go to the other side to find the spiritual herbs that could detoxify the demonic poison in his body. Now there was a ready-made guide. Chapter 649. In the blink of an eye, 5 days had passed since Li Daocheng met Lu Mei. In these 5 days, the group of 5 had been on the road. Every 5 hours, they would rest for an hour. The injuries on Lu Mei and the other 2 were easily healed by Li Daocheng. Li Daocheng kept removing the veil, which made Lu Mei and she look at him in a different light. Li Daocheng's image in their hearts was extremely high after he killed the soul assimilation Ghost King. He also showed off his miraculous healing skills. Such a young man had unfathomable supernatural powers. It was impossible for the female cultivator not to be moved by him. For female cultivators, it was better to marry well than to cultivate well. This sentence had been passed down since the ancient times. Lu Mei's feelings were naturally more complicated than Qi-er's. King Luo Feng was extremely respectful to Li Daocheng along the way. This fox demon was considered the pride of the heavens on Spiritual Island, but he had completely bowed down to Li Daocheng's strength. Wang Dongming was the most awkward one. Ever since Li Daocheng killed the soul assimilation Ghost King, he had been on tenterhooks. Before that, Wang Dongming had personally shouted that he wanted to kill Li Daocheng. Every second was torture for Wang Dongming. He felt that this friend of Lu Mei's would most likely kill him. However, Li Daocheng did not even look at Wang Dongming. He treated him like air, as if he did not exist. Li Daocheng did not heal Wang Dongming's injuries either. During the later part of the journey, Wang Dongming was obviously not as strong as he wanted to be. He took out almost all of his belongings before he could barely keep up with the group. Wang Dongming had consumed all the spiritual medicine he had with him in these 5 days. However, his injuries did not improve at all. Instead, they became worse because he did not get enough rest during the long journey. After 6 days and 1 night of running, Wang Dongming really couldn't hold on any longer. If he didn't get any elixirs to replenish his energy, then not only would he not be able to keep up with everyone, his injuries would even worsen. Wang Dongming was naturally scared to death. He didn't know why, but during these 5 days of travel, he hadn't encountered any dark ghosts. However, Wang Dongming was well aware of the dangers of the endless mountain range. If he was alone, even if he wasn't injured, he would still die without a doubt. While the others were resting, Wang Dongming braced himself and begged Qi for the elixir. Qi, give me some spirit-gathering pills. It's so uncomfortable. Wang Dongming clutched his chest and begged. He was about to cry. Qi heart softened. She saw that Wang Dongming was pitiful. After all, they had grown up together on the spiritual island. She could not bear to leave him in the lurch. Therefore, Qi gave more than 10 essence-gathering pills to Wang Dongming, leaving only 3 for herself. After obtaining the essence-gathering pill, Wang Dongming's face lit up with joy, and he immediately swallowed one. The spirit-gathering pill was only a spirit medicine used to recover spirit qi. It had no healing properties, but it was still useful for Wang Dongming. Because of his injuries, the spirit qi in his body was being consumed much faster than usual. Wang Dongming didn't dare to stay any longer. He turned and walked 100 meters away before sitting down alone. Li Daocheng sat cross-legged. Naturally, Wang Dongming's actions couldn't escape his spiritual will. Li Daocheng couldn't be bothered to deal with people like this. Originally, he wanted to kill them with one slap. However, on second thought, if this guy was an important person on Spiritual Island, killing him would slow down his progress in finding the antidote. There was no need to make enemies for no reason. After some consideration, Li Daocheng's attitude towards Wang Dongming was to ignore him and let him fend for himself. If he was lucky enough to follow them all the way, Li Daocheng didn't intend to kill him. At least, he wouldn't kill him before he found the 7 spirit herbs. Wang Dongming sat down under a withered tree and immediately took out another essence-gathering pill and swallowed it. Wang Dongming knew that he couldn't go on like this. He had to concoct a healing elixir at the last minute. Wang Dongming's grandfather, Wang Xuanye, was the most outstanding spirit alchemist on Gainei Spirit Island. Wang Dongming had been influenced by him since he was young, so he had a deep understanding of spirit herbs. At least, he knew most of the spirit herbs on Blackwood Star. For this trip, Wang Dongming was actually participating as the team doctor. Originally, Wang Dongming had brought many herbs and elixir bottles with him. However, a few days ago, he was ambushed and lost the storage ring given to him by the Great Elder. As a result, he lost all the spirit herbs on him. However, before Wang Dongming left, he moved a few of the important spirit herbs into his storage ring. Along the way, Wang Dongming didn't dare to take them out. He was worried that King Luo Feng and the other 2 would find out that he had pocketed the tribe's items. Wang Dongming was optimistic about his injuries. However, he didn't expect the journey to be so tiring. There was almost no time to take a breather. Li Daocheng was like a machine. He worked meticulously and maintained a moderate speed that was the maximum speed that the 4 of them could reach. Wang Dongming took the spirit herbs given to him by Qi. As soon as he sat down, his chest suddenly churned. Puff! A mouthful of old blood spurted out his mouth. Wang Dongming felt that his heart was burning. His spirit veins seemed to have been ignited. He didn't know why his injuries suddenly worsened. Oh no! Wang Dongming's expression changed. He felt that he was going to go crazy. Wang Dongming couldn't care less about hiding the fact that he had pocketed the spirit herbs. Saving his life was the most important thing. He immediately took out the spirit herbs that he had pocketed. There were a total of 6 spirit herbs. They were a candle dragon herb, 2 clear sun herbs, a cold scale flower, a thundersea epiphyllum, and an eastern purple mistvine. These 6 spirit herbs were all more than 1,000 years old. At the same time, they had many effects. They were the core materials for making many healing spirit herbs. Not only that, these 6 spirit herbs had strong healing effects when taken alone. At this time, Wang Dongming's heart was burning and he felt extremely uncomfortable. He picked up the cold scale herb and stuffed it into his mouth. This was a kind of cold spirit herb that grew under the glacier. After 1,000 years of incubation, it was very effective against fire poison and had the effect of calming the mind. It was even better for internal fire injuries. Almost at the same time, when Wang Dongming took out these spirit herbs, Li Daocheng, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes and looked in Wang Dongming's direction. The familiar smell. The 7 spirit herbs had been engraved in Li Daocheng's mind. As long as they appeared, he would immediately sense them. Just now, 2 smells appeared at the same time, and the smell was extremely strong. Li Daocheng immediately noticed it. Whoosh! Li Daocheng disappeared from where he stood. Wang Dongming swallowed the cold scale herb and immediately felt much better. The fire in his heart was suppressed by the cold scale herb. Just the cold scale herb wasn't enough. Wang Dongming picked up the clear sun herb and planned to continue swallowing it. At this time, his eyes flashed and the clear sun herb in his hand disappeared. Wang Dongming was stunned for a moment, and only then did he realize that Li Daocheng had appeared in front of him. Wang Dongming subconsciously leaned back, and his eyes revealed a trace of fear. Facing Li Daocheng, he felt that this terrifying young man could kill him at any time. Li Daocheng held the clear sun herb to his nose and sniffed. Then, his eyes revealed a trace of a smile. That's right, this is the smell. One of the 7 smells. What is this spirit herb called? Where did you get it? Li Daocheng looked down at Wang Dongming and asked. My grandfather gave it to me. This is called clear sun herb. Wang Dongming didn't dare to tell the truth. Li Daocheng frowned. What I mean is, where does this spirit herb grow? Wang Dongming was stunned and didn't understand. He paused for a moment before replying. It's in the endless mountain range. Where? Li Daocheng's eyes twitched. He didn't expect it to be in the endless mountain range. In the clear sun volcano. Wang Dongming honestly replied. How far is it from here? Li Daocheng quickly asked. According to our current speed, we can reach it in half a month. Wang Dongming calculated and replied. The endless mountain range was really big. Li Daocheng sighed in his heart. No wonder those mortals in the wilderness couldn't reach the end no matter how hard they tried. However, Wang Dongming's calculations were based on their current speed. If Li Daocheng went at full speed, he should be able to arrive in 1 or 2 days. However, Li Daocheng could do nothing about this tortoise speed. This was already Lu Mei and the others' limit, and they could not increase their speed any further. Lead the way. Li Daocheng couldn't wait any longer. Now, Wang Dongming was dumbfounded. If the place you mentioned really has this spirit herb, I will treat your injuries. Li Daocheng immediately said. But, Wang Dongming wanted to say something, but stopped. But what? Li Daocheng was a little impatient. Exalted immortal, the clear sun volcano is the lair of the ghost manor. It's one of the 3 most terrifying places in the endless mountain range. It's not safe there. Wang Dongming said bitterly. He had just escaped from a ghost claw a few days ago, and now he had to go to the ghost land. He was really unwilling. However, he had no choice in front of Li Daocheng. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.